I exposed my cheating wife's lies, took everything from her, and left her with nothing but regret. I reflected on the recent weeks, struggling to pinpoint any specific evidence that would suggest she was cheating. The sense of unease within me resulted from various small incidents accumulating, leaving me with an unsettling feeling. While I sensed something was amiss, I couldn't identify it precisely. Although I was fairly certain that something was happening, I lacked proof and details regarding who, what, or where it might be occurring. Doubts about my own sanity surfaced, questioning whether I was overreacting or imagining scenarios of her infidelity. Despite my uncertainty, my gut was in turmoil, indicating that something indeed was going on. It could be the early stages of a fling or affair, perhaps a one-time occurrence. Strangely, the more I dwelled on these thoughts, the more convinced I became. I'd been grappling with these concerns for what felt like weeks. But how long had the situation been unfolding before I became slightly aware that something was wrong? I took another sip of my JD, signaling the bartender, who nodded with a half-smile, having seen that troubled look many times before. Surveying the quiet bar filled with indistinct chatter, I noticed a lack of joy. The patrons had bland, unremarkable faces, all nondescript and average. The only woman in the place, in her 40s, possibly overdressed for the time and place, seemed a bit desperate, receiving drinks from an older guy. He appeared hopeful, though looking at her, he didn't need to try so hard, she already had his number. Other patrons were merely passing time while the rain outside fell, further dampening spirits. Soon, each would run out of reasons to stay in the sanctity of the bar and head homeward. I remained undecided about my course of action. I turned towards the voice, and there she was, looking at me with eyes that seemed to peer into my soul. As I attempted to respond, words eluded me. In the dimly lit bar, water dripping from her, Sammy started to remove her coat, and I questioned her presence. Curious, I asked why she was here. Sammy explained that she was worried about me, sensing that she would find me at the bar. She suggested we talk. I stared at her, wondering about her motives. Could I trust her? To steady myself, I took a sip of my JD and ordered her a vodka and soda. We waited for the bartender to move away before resuming our conversation, our eyes conveying uncertainty and a subtle struggle for dominance. Sammy pointed out that my recent behavior had caught her attention, sensing that I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. I looked into her brown eyes but quickly averted my gaze. There was an unspoken understanding between us. I assured her that everything was okay between us, attempting to downplay the situation. However, she wasn't convinced. My heart sank as I realized my attempts to minimize the issue were futile. Placing her glass on the table, Sammy locked her fingers together, leaning slightly forward. She told me she knew what was going on. Confused, I feigned ignorance, but Sammy insisted. We moved to a booth for privacy, reluctantly agreeing. I asked her what she thought she knew, attempting to deflect the conversation. Sammy saw through my bluff, asserting that I couldn't lie to her after our long history. She encouraged me to talk, insisting that I needed someone to confide in. I'd known Sammy since she was 17. She was a constant presence and harbored a crush on me when I initially dated her sister Claire, who was 3 years older. Despite their differences, Sammy and I always got along, occasionally leading to sibling clashes with Claire. Over the years, Claire and I married after 2 years and settled into what I perceived as an ideal future. Both working in decent jobs, we earned enough for a comfortable life. Sammy, my sister-in-law, had enjoyed her late teens and early 22s and, at 25, sought a more mature phase in life. She had matured into someone any guy would be fortunate to be close to. Claire and I had been married for 5 years, with our anniversary due in another month. Contemplating whether we would make it that far, Sammy, an attractive woman and a friend besides my sister-in-law, looked at me with my eyes filling. Struggling to articulate my emotions while her resounding "I know" echoed in my mind. Sammy reached across the table, offering support. As her fingers gently stroked mine, I felt my heart slowly breaking. As she spoke, she mentioned that if I wouldn't say it, she believed she knew that Claire was cheating on me. Despite the shock of her words, I stubbornly tried to process what I knew and its implications. I resisted hearing more, convincing myself that if I didn't acknowledge it, it couldn't be happening, sparing me from the pain of confronting the truth. Sammy noticed my glassy-eyed expression and questioned whether it was shock or denial. She expressed her love for me and urged me to wake up, suggesting that it might be a misunderstanding. In response, I attempted to deflect her and continued deceiving myself. Sammy's eyes flashed with rage, and she exclaimed, drawing the bartender's attention. I assured the bartender that everything was fine. Sammy apologized, expressing her frustration with me and emphasizing her concern for my well-being. She urged me to wise up and face the reality of the situation, emphasizing that we needed to take action. I agreed to start, and Sammy shared her suspicions. She recounted an incident from a few weeks ago when she was with my partner and she received a call on her mobile. Sammy found it peculiar that Claire left the room to take the call, considering they were sisters. I nodded, feeling a sense of dread. Continuing her story, Sammy revealed that she checked Claire's phone, discovering there was no lock code. The call was from a guy, saved as Robert. Sammy didn't know any Robert or Bob but decided to monitor for any recurrence. I asked about the identity of this Robert or Bob guy, seeking clarification. After about a week, Sammy discovered the identity of the guy my partner had been messaging. He was someone she knew from years ago, before our relationship began. Apparently, they reconnected through social media or chat sites, and their messaging had been going on for a few weeks. I admitted that I had no knowledge of these interactions, only sensing that there were small things keeping us apart. Sammy acknowledged this but explained that it was all part of what they were doing, nothing overt, but it seemed like things were falling into place for them. Curious, I asked if it was just a couple of friends messaging each other, perhaps reminiscing about old times. Sammy confirmed that it started that way but hinted that something had changed. I was surprised and asked if I hadn't noticed anything suspicious. I mentioned that it felt like circumstances were conspiring to keep us apart, and there was an obvious lack of opportunity for any fun, too. Sammy stared at me incredulously, expressing a sense of disbelief. I returned her gaze, awaiting her next words. She urged me to pull my head out of the metaphorical sand, emphasizing her love for me. In response, I questioned the extent of the situation, seeking to understand how far it had gone. Sammy met my gaze, and her eyes briefly flickered, providing an unspoken confirmation. My anger began to simmer within me, prompting a quick barrage of questions about when, how, and where these encounters had taken place. Sammy shared that she knew my partner had met the other guy at least 3 times over the past 2 weeks. Initially unsure, Sammy only became certain 2 days ago that the situation had progressed. She had a lunch with one of her friends who worked with Claire, and some information slipped out during their conversation. Sammy discovered that Claire had met the guy twice for lunch and at least once for dinner the previous week. She asked if this aligned with what I had observed or suspected. I looked at her as I took in her words. There were a couple of times recently when I had called her office to arrange a lunchtime meet, and she wasn't there or had just gone out. Was that when she met him? Then last week she had that seminar thing she just had to attend. It was a late notice thing and arranged for after work. She had gotten home late that night, after 12. Thinking back, she had come in saying that it had dragged on, and the team had gone for a drink in the hotel bar to unwind before leaving. No love-making that night, I remember, and she hit the shower before bed too. My mind was racing, my brain scrambled as I took in these hurtful facts. Sammy expressed concern, telling me not to do anything reckless that could lead to legal trouble. I could sense the change in her expression as I made my decision. I declared my refusal to tolerate the situation any longer and vowed to put an end to it. I affirmed that I would not accept a cheating partner and was determined to make them both pay for their actions. Sammy cautioned me, advising against impulsive actions without a plan. Her words had a strange way of helping me calm down, confirming that my suspicions were indeed true. Seeking more information, I asked if she knew where my partner might be at that moment. Sammy confirmed that she believed my partner was currently with the other guy, explaining that it was the reason she sought me out. The rage resurfaced, prompting me to pound the table. People in the bar turned to look as I signaled the bartender. I asked Sammy if she knew the exact location. Sammy explained that she didn't know the exact location, but planned to speak with my partner the next day to gather more information. She mentioned that the other guy is married with a couple of kids, though she wasn't sure about his residence. She assured me that she would try to find out more to assist in the situation. I expressed gratitude, reaching for her hand and holding it tightly as I wiped away a tear from her cheek. I thanked her for her support, acknowledging the difficulty of the situation for her. Sammy, looking worried, asked about my plans. I assured her that I couldn't act on my impulses just yet, but intended to put an end to the situation definitively. I promised there would be consequences, without remorse, for both of them. In the meantime, I planned to secure what was rightfully mine and gather evidence for my next course of action. As I finished my JD, I signaled the bartender, slipping him a note and telling him to keep the change. Sammy continued to look concerned and asked when I planned to confront my partner. I considered the situation, planning to make some calls the next day while addressing my assets. I emphasized my determination not to give her a single penny. Sammy pointed out the difficulty of being around my partner, and I acknowledged that it had been challenging for the past few weeks. I believe that if she hadn't noticed any change by now, she likely wouldn't in the future. Sammy stood up, expressing her need to leave. I offered to talk again tomorrow, and she agreed, promising to find out more for me. She put on her coat, and I stood to help her, feeling her proximity. She resembled her sister so much as she looked up at me, tears in her eyes. I kissed her cheek, reassuring her that I would be fine. She smiled and left, disappearing into the dark and wet evening. Sitting back down, I took a deep breath, contemplating my next steps. One thing was clear in my mind: they would pay, and the retaliation would be swift, relentless, and unforgiving. Update: I don't recall much after that. Somehow, I woke up in my own bed with a mouth like the bottom of a parrot's cage. My head was still swimming as I raised it off the bed. Rolling over, I noticed I was alone and there was no sign of Claire. My senses slowly awakened as I heard noises from downstairs. Sliding my feet over the side of the bed, I tried to stand. Waking up the next morning, I couldn't help but wonder about the events of the previous night. As I staggered to the bathroom, attempting to shake off the grogginess, I proceeded to rouse myself. Entering the kitchen, I found her there, inquiring about the state I was in. In response to her question, I vaguely mentioned having a drink with an old friend and getting carried away. Sitting down, I poured some orange juice, drank it, and poured another. When she probed further, asking about the friend's identity, my mind started to work. I mentioned a guy named Bob, explaining that I knew him from way back and that he was in town for a couple of days on business. At the mention of Bob, I noticed a flicker of something on her face as she turned. I elaborated, recalling our college days and football years together. Claire seemed puzzled, unable to remember Bob. Nevertheless, she brushed it off, expressing indifference as long as I had fun. It was the first warning sign. Seated across from me at the table, I thought about my conversation with Sammy the previous night. I casually inquired about her activities the night before, feigning interest. I looked into her eyes as she lied about finishing work and going for a light meal and a drink with colleagues. She claimed to be home by 9:30, expressing concern for me due to a late meeting. I knew she wasn't home by then, as I was still at home until 10 p.m., deciding to head to the bar when enough was enough. That was the second warning sign. She continued, mentioning some tasks she needed to complete in the morning and hinting at being late in the evening. Bob, an old friend, was expected to be in touch, and they had plans to catch up. I suggested inviting Bob over, emphasizing the pleasure of reconnecting with old friends. She agreed and asked if I remembered him, using an endearing term. She stared at me with a neutral expression, attempting to conceal any reaction, but I sensed something beneath the surface. Despite her poker face, I could perceive a hint of emotion. I dismissed her inquiry about inviting Bob over, assuring her that I would manage on my own. I decided to get ready for the day, having more orange juice and a couple of painkillers before leaving the house, ensuring I didn't miss the opportunity to collect my car left at the bar. 30 minutes later, I departed, while Claire continued preparing for her day. As I dressed, I contemplated the situation, my determination growing. This couldn't continue for much longer. I clenched my fists, angered by the thought of Claire with Bob, vowing revenge. I harbored intense resentment towards him. The workday proved chaotic, with a constant stream of calls, dealing with issues on the line. My secretary handled some calls, but I couldn't avoid crucial meetings. The tension within me intensified as I navigated through the day, fueled by a growing desire for retribution. By mid-morning, the initial rush eased off, and I had some almost free time to deal with my personal issues. I closed my office door and started to check out my financials. Within 15 minutes, I had tightened the purse strings and moved some cash out of reach. I also arranged a meeting with a solicitor to discuss a possible divorce. I still had a few days before that, so my thinking was that it would give me time to get more information, not that it would matter that much anyway. But it could give me some leverage. Claire had her own bank account and credit card, so there was no need to do anything there. It was access to our joint account that was of concern, but I plugged that loophole quickly, so if it came to it, she couldn't get any more than what was left. My own account was secure and only had a smallish balance. The rest was shifted out and safe. We had no children, so essentially it would be a straightforward split should it come to that. I had decided in my own mind that we could only get over this if Claire were to confess her sins, so to speak, and seek forgiveness. Any kind of reticence there, and we were done. That thought made me feel sad. I sat at my desk in silence as I mulled over what had transpired and the actions I had taken so far. Today, I needed more information on the Bob character and evidence, or would the fact that I knew about it be enough to really duck the two of them over? The phone interrupted my thoughts, and it was Sammy on the line. I shared that I was occupied with various thoughts and plans but had initiated some actions. Sammy provided additional information about the guy, Bob Stones, revealing that he was married. She had his address and workplace, obtained discreetly through her friend who had seen Claire with him. According to Sammy, they seemed to be growing closer despite attempts to conceal it. Acknowledging the start of potential evidence, I requested Bob's details from Sammy. Within minutes, I located his social media page and obtained a photo. Something about his face seemed familiar, triggering a vague memory. Despite the unsettling feeling, I decided to call Claire around lunchtime, intending to stir the container. During the call, Claire explained she had a meeting with a client named Mr. Stones, which added another layer to the situation. Suppressing my emotions, I kept the conversation casual, though her mention of Mr. Stones felt like a taunt. Strike three, I thought, determined to take swift and merciless action against both of them. Ending the call, I masked my anger, promising to see her later and enduring her declaration of love with a clenched jaw. After ending the call, my anger boiled within me. Seated there, I clenched my teeth, contemplating the unsettling revelation. My secretary appeared, poking her head into the office, offering to grab something from the deli down the street. Considering for a moment, I instructed her to surprise me with something substantial, hearty, and rich in red meat, something to sink my teeth into. She gave me a peculiar look but nodded, closing the door behind her, sensing that my behavior had been unusual all morning. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. Sammy visited her sister's office and noticed Claire leaving the elevator alongside a tall, dark-haired man, roughly around 30 years old, Bob Stones. The man Sammy had identified from his online photo. Stepping in front of her sister, Sammy surprised Claire, who seemed uneasy about her plans being disrupted. Sammy explained her impromptu visit, expressing a desire to see her sister and possibly go for lunch. Claire, visibly uncomfortable, mentioned that she and Mr. Stones were having a business lunch and suggested meeting another time. Mr. Stones introduced himself, and Sammy, feigning innocence, asked how long he had known Claire. The question seemed to catch him off guard, and Claire hurriedly pulled him away, citing a meeting they needed to attend. As they left the building and entered a waiting cab, Sammy smiled, observing her sister looking back at her as they drove away. I sat in my office, munching through a massive sub filled with red meat, smiling to myself as I nodded at it slowly, savoring it while contemplating my next steps. Sammy had confirmed that Claire had left her office, so she called her secretary and found out she would be out all afternoon. Well, isn't that just ducking great? Everything was set regarding my finances, and I had a locksmith on speed dial with the terms prearranged. My solicitor was primed and ready to act as soon as I provided him with the remaining information he had requested. Okay, tonight was going to be the first stage. I was going to really mess with the pair of them for a little while before I pulled the trigger. My old man always told me, don't let them know you're coming for them, just take Route 1, be direct and destroy the bastards. A man of few, if not direct, words. Maybe that was something I had forgotten recently, but it was coming, it was on its way. Update that evening at home, Claire walked in, appearing normal, and nothing seemed out of place until I detected a faint scent of men's cologne. As I went to kiss her, she noticed my reaction, and without verbalizing anything, I gave her a light kiss on the cheek and made my way to the door. Curious, she inquired about my plans, asking if everything was okay. I assured her that I was fine but had a matter to attend to. I explained that I was heading to Jerry's place for a poker game with a few colleagues from work, hoping it would be a good distraction. Closing the door behind me, I got into my car and left the driveway, grinding my teeth in frustration. Upon arriving at Jerry's, I parked outside and entered his garage. Jerry, a longtime friend with a history of dealing with the police, had combat training, making him the ideal companion for what I had in mind. He was a substantial figure, a friend since school, and I had called him earlier to seek his assistance. He readily offered his support without asking questions. This kind of unwavering support was exactly what I needed. We quickly slipped into the garage and I changed into a pair of dark overalls with a matching ski mask. We looked like two mime artists standing in silence. No words were exchanged as we got into a nondescript, second-hand car. Jerry had obtained nothing remarkable or noticeable about it. Cruising slowly across town to the address Sammy had given me, still no words passed between us. We had agreed on the format before, so there was no need for further discussion. Jerry parked the car outside Bob Stones' home, and there was no sign of life, with just one visible light. We waited in silence. As the front door opened, we saw him step out, get into his car, and ease down the road. Jerry followed at a safe distance. We already knew his destination, so there was no rush or panic. Parking at the driving range posed no problem, and we stayed in the car. The radio played in the background as we sat, watching and waiting. The tension inside me was almost unbearable, making it challenging to stay still. The urge to step out and walk around was strong, but we knew it was risky. Gradually, the car park emptied until only a couple of other cars remained. Both of us tensed as we observed him making his way to his car. Jerry got out and stealthily approached the target. Afterwards, I drove us out of the car park quietly, without drawing attention. Jerry remarked on the success of the operation as he removed his gloves and mask. I expressed gratitude, acknowledging that I appreciated his assistance. Jerry assured me not to worry, stating that he owed me and could never fully repay me for what I had done for him. I reminded him that friends help each other and pointed out that at least his hands weren't injured, and there was no CCTV in the car park. We considered the job well done. Deciding to head back, Jerry suggested starting a card game with the others, who would be there by now. We drove back, spending the next 4 hours playing poker for fun. The atmosphere among the guys was positive, and they understood the situation, providing the support I needed, boosting my confidence for the upcoming confrontation with Claire. However, before addressing the main issue, I planned to play some mind games with her. I stumbled through the door just after 1 a.m., intentionally exaggerating the amount I had to drink. Jerry had arranged for one of the guys to drop off my car. Claire, waiting up, questioned my lateness and examined me closely. I dismissed her concern, mentioning that Jerry and the guys had dropped me off in my car, admitting to having a bit too much JD. Disregarding my jacket and missing the coat pegs, I slumped onto the sofa and looked at her. Claire, with crossed arms and a disgusted expression, sat there. I maintained a blank expression, waiting for her to speak. She couldn't hold back and finally asked, "What is going on, Steve? Is there someone else or something? You're acting really weird lately." I chuckled, suppressing the anger building within me, reminding myself to take it easy. "I'm all right, my petal. Just been through a rough patch recently. It'll all be over soon." My words lingered in Claire's mind, leaving her unsure but sensing something amiss. We went to bed, and I pretended to collapse, feigning immediate sleep. It irked her, as she seemed ready for a confrontation, but I refused to engage. The following morning, Claire was the first to rise, making coffee. I descended the stairs, acting obnoxious, pretending to have a hangover. Playfully entering the kitchen, I greeted her and mentioned my throbbing head. She tossed a headache remedy my way. As I sipped my coffee, she appeared subdued, and I noticed her phone on the kitchen table. Wondering if she had received any calls, Claire noticed my gaze on her phone, and I could sense her desire to reach for it, although doing so would seem odd. Pouring more orange juice, I casually picked up the phone. A look of panic flashed across her face as I intercepted a message. I briefly glanced at it before sliding the phone back to her, stating that it needed charging to avoid a flat battery and any missed messages. Leaving the kitchen, I went to get dressed, leaving Claire looking after me with a sense that something was amiss. She wondered if I could know, dismissing the thought as she believed she had been careful. Their involvement had only been going on for a few weeks' lunches, dinner 3 times, and hotel stays 3 times. She considered it nothing more than fun, confident that I would never find out, especially since I wasn't going without. The revelation led her to contemplate her recent intimacy with her husband, unable to recall the last time. She pondered if her neglect might have contributed to my suspicions. Hastily descending the stairs, I swiftly exited the door, sidestepping Claire's attempt for a more passionate farewell. Waving and smiling, I pulled out of the driveway and headed to work. Around 11 a.m., I decided to send Claire a text for amusement, expressing regrets for the day and explaining that there was a lot on my mind, assuring her it would soon be resolved. I settled back, awaiting a reaction. Later in the day, Sammy visited me, inquiring about what had happened. I questioned Sammy about her earlier statement, asking her what she meant. Earlier in the day, an employee from the golf club had found Bob Stones in the trunk of his car, badly beaten. Claire had informed Sammy, and she was shaken. Sammy asked if I had done it, and I responded that I didn't care too much either way, denying any involvement. I went on to mention that Claire had told me she found out about Bob's condition through a scheduled meeting with him. His company had called, stating he was in the hospital and his wife had called them. Sammy found my explanation cute and plausible, but suggested that maybe next time it wouldn't be so easy for them. I was asked about my cryptic remark, and I replied, saying that accidents happen in the strangest places. That night, upon arriving home, Claire was absent, and her car was gone. There was no message. Irritated, I called her phone, cheerfully inquiring about her whereabouts. She responded, explaining that she was at the hospital visiting a friend, assuring me it wouldn't be long. I expressed my hope for her friend's swift recovery, bid her goodbye, and hung up before she could respond. 30 minutes later, she returned, looking drained. I asked about her friend's condition, expressing my hope that it wasn't too serious. Claire hesitated before responding, mentioning that it was nothing too dramatic. Her friend had just fallen and would be home in a few days. I suggested coffee, and she accepted, thanking me. While sipping her coffee, Claire brought up an incident at her workplace, mentioning that one of her company's reps had been assaulted the other night. I reacted with surprise, asking for details. She explained that he was attacked and left in his car overnight, but reassured me that he was okay. Bob wasn't hurt too badly, and it seemed like they wanted to mess him up for no reason. Nothing was stolen or anything. I couldn't help but think about the contradiction, given my prior denial of knowing Bob. Update: she noticed me looking at her and realized she had made a mistake. She tried to cover it up, but she knew it was too late. Now he was aware of the situation as well. Quickly, she hurried to make an exit to change. I suspected she would be on the phone any second, but to whom? I decided I needed to reassess my plan. Since things were escalating, I had to move things forward a bit. Calling upstairs to Claire, I informed her I needed to go out for a little while, reassuring her I wouldn't be long. I drove to Bob Stone's home address and knocked on the door. A petite, dark-haired woman opened the door. I explained that I was Steve Ryland, and my wife, Claire Ryland, had dealings with her husband. She looked at me nervously, yet intrigued. I requested to come in for a moment. In the lounge, she realized the gravity of the situation as I mentioned the affair between Claire and her husband. I expressed my regret for having to break the news and informed her that he was currently in the hospital. She folded inwardly, tears flowing for a few seconds, expressing her suspicions. She mentioned that she knew he was at it again and decided to divorce him. She felt that Claire had enough chances to come clean and the lies were unbearable. Unsure of how long the affair had been going on, she was convinced of Claire's betrayal. When I inquired about the incident the other night, she admitted uncertainty. I clarified that I didn't lay a finger on him and expressed my shock at the situation, indicating my lack of concern about whoever damaged him. I mentioned that I couldn't be sorry about it. I questioned if he might have been involved with another man's wife, to which she responded, "Nothing surprises me." She decided to keep him out of her life, emphasizing that they had moved back to the area because he was fooling around before. Before leaving, I provided her with my locksmith's and solicitor's contact information. Realizing the complexity of the situation as I drove slowly home, I focused on dealing with the other half of my problem. My inner rage was under control, understanding that once retribution began, it would run its course of action I would follow and relish for the most part. The end of my marriage saddened me, but I knew there was no going back from her betrayal. My one consolation was that the parties that caused me pain would experience it in far greater measure. I do not forgive. Update: I guided my car onto the driveway, noticing Claire's car exactly where she had left it just a couple of hours ago. Absent-mindedly tapping the bonnet as I passed, I approached my front door and slid my key into the lock. A heavy feeling settled in my heart, realizing this might be the last time I do this as a married man. Stepping inside, the weight of the recent worries pressed on my shoulders, making them incredibly heavy as I slowly moved towards the lounge. The murmur of the television greeted me as I neared the doorway. There, perched on the sofa, was Claire, her demeanor radiating fear and trepidation. A sense that something was amiss hung in the air, as if the game was up without a word being spoken. Nervously, she shook, trying to maintain composure. I stood silently watching her, and as our eyes met, I saw fear and attempt to speak, but nothing escaped her lips. Walking into the room, I passed her to fix myself a drink, remaining silent. I reached for my drink, my unblinking eyes locked onto hers. She waited, sensing something was amiss. My expression remained impassive as I observed the woman I had deeply loved, now balancing those feelings with the pain she had needlessly caused me. It was time for her to feel my pain. As I stared, she detected no reason for optimism in my face. Pulling herself together, Claire straightened up, deciding to brazen it out. Unaware of what I knew, she couldn't endure the incriminating silence any longer. She asked where I had been, and frustration crept into her voice at my silent treatment. I responded, saying that I would tell her where I went if she told me where she had been. Uncertainty flickered in her eyes as she insisted she was at the hospital visiting a friend. I maintained a blank expression and fear flashed across her eyes. She was rattled. Once again, she deflected the question back to me, thinking she had skillfully batted it away. I told her to stop the nonsense and explained that I visited a friend myself, someone I hadn't known for long. Our conversation was crucial, and although I hadn't met her before, we were now friends of sorts. I had an enlightening talk with her about her husband, Bob Stone's, asking if she had heard of him. Her face flushed as I toyed with her emotions. I explained that I needed to talk to the Stones woman about her husband's infidelity, having discovered his affair. In response to my revelation, she offered concern, asking if I was okay and offering to get me a drink. I inquired about her knowledge of Bob Stone's affairs, watching her struggle to find words. I took the lead, telling her that I knew about her involvement with Bob and had known for a while. I challenged her to speak up before leaving, emphasizing that it didn't mean anything and was just closeness. I scoffed at her excuses, reminding her of the vows we both took. As she continued to defend herself, I called her out, expressing my frustration with her lies. I pointed out that she treated me like a fool, and her attempts to downplay the affair infuriated me. I sarcastically commented on the claim that it only happened twice, and questioned whether it was worth our marriage. She apologized, claiming it didn't mean anything, and expressing a willingness to make it up to me. I laughed bitterly, accusing her of being sorry for getting caught and questioning whether she would have stopped if not exposed. I asserted that all the lies she told had become second nature, and only she believed them. I told her that she was not the woman I fell in love with and married. She looked at me as the weight of my hurt started to penetrate her cheater's facade. She realized the seriousness of the situation and asked what she could do, promising to do anything. I informed her that we were done and called Sammy, letting her know about the situation. Sammy would be arriving shortly to pick her up. Claire, shocked, asked where she would go, and I responded harshly, saying she could go wherever she liked, even back to the hospital to see her boyfriend. He didn't care. We were done. Claire sat stunned as there was a knock on the door. I greeted Sammy and told her to get Claire out of here. I explained that if she didn't leave, I was afraid of what I might do to her. Despite hating what she had done, I still cared about her, but it was time for her to go. Sammy hurriedly gathered Claire's things for the next few days. I thanked Sammy for her assistance and mentioned that I would be in contact soon. As Sammy prepared Claire to leave, I listened to the sound of my wife sobbing. Sammy swiftly packed Claire's belongings into a couple of suitcases, and in less than 10 minutes she was removed from my home. The real challenge would be to get her out of my life permanently and erase the pain. Retribution would help with that. Staring into the flames of the pyre I had built in the backyard, I watched everything of Claire's go up in flames. There was no way I would allow her back into my house for anything.
Hey there, and welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. We're so glad to have you here today. We hope you enjoy this story we've prepared for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Marcus Steele's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he navigated through the rush hour traffic. The past week had been a grueling marathon of stress tests, computer simulations, and endless revisions. But it was worth it. His revolutionary, earthquake-resistant building design was going to change the face of structural engineering. As he turned onto his street, a smirk played at the corner of his mouth. He was home early, ready to surprise Veronica. Maybe she'd actually be impressed this time. Instead of making some snide comment about how he was married to his work, the house loomed before him, silent and still. No lights on. Strange. Veronica's yoga class should have ended an hour ago. Marcus entered, the silence hitting him like a physical force. "Veronica," he called out. No answer. He moved through the house, noticing little details that set his teeth on edge. 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. A hastily abandoned meal on the dining room table. The air thick with the scent of Veronica's favorite perfume, and something else. Something masculine. In the kitchen, Veronica's laptop sat open on the counter. Marcus paused, his hand hovering over the keyboard. He'd never invaded her privacy before. He'd been a Boy Scout, after all. Trustworthy, loyal, all that bullshit. But something wasn't right. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, just like they did when a client was lying through their teeth. He tapped the spacebar, waking the screen. His eyes narrowed as he noticed a hidden folder on the desktop. It was labeled innocuously, "Fitness Progress." Marcus clicked it open, his stomach turning to lead as the contents loaded. Photos. Dozens of them. Intimate photos of their neighbor, Chad Blackwell. That smug bastard with his perfect abs and vapid smile. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, scrolling through the damning evidence. Then he saw it. A document, buried among the photos. Its innocuous title belied its chilling contents, MS Accident Plan. He opened it, his hands shaking with rage as he read. It wasn't just an affair. It was a goddamn conspiracy. His wife and that meathead were planning his accidental death. The document detailed various scenarios. A car accident on the winding road near their home, a tragic fall during a hike, even a potential poisoning disguised as food poisoning. The level of detail was sickening. They'd even research life insurance policies and ways to make the deaths look accidental to maximize the payout. Marcus leaned back, his mind racing. He'd dedicated 5 years of his life to this marriage. 5 years of hard work, compromise, and what he thought was love. And this was how she repaid him? He heard the front door open, Veronica's laughter floating through the house. Quickly, he closed the laptop and moved to the living room, schooling his features into a mask of exhaustion. "Oh." Veronica startled as she saw him. "You're home early." Marcus nodded, watching her closely, the slight widening of her eyes, the way she subtly checked her appearance in the hallway mirror. "Yeah, wrapped up the project ahead of schedule." "That's great," Veronica said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You must be exhausted. Why don't you go relax while I whip up some dinner?" Marcus forced a tired smile. "Sounds perfect. I'm going to grab a shower first." As he climbed the stairs, his mind was already formulating a plan. Veronica and Chad thought they were so clever. Well, they were about to learn just how badly they'd underestimated Marcus' steel. In the shower, Marcus let the hot water cascade over him, washing away the shock and leaving only cold, calculated anger. He replayed every moment of his marriage, searching for signs he might have missed. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to his face? When he came back downstairs, Veronica was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. She looked up as he entered, her smile a perfect mask of affection. "Feeling better, honey?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. Marcus nodded, settling into a chair at the kitchen island. "Much. The hot water did wonders for my neck. You know how I get when I'm hunched over blueprints all day." Veronica sked sympathetically. "Poor baby. Maybe you should book a massage. I could recommend someone." "Let me guess," Marcus interrupted, his tone carefully neutral. "Chad knows a guy." Veronica's knife paused mid-chop. "Well, yes, actually. How did you know?" Marcus shrugged, watching her face carefully. "Just a guess. Chad seems to know everyone in the fitness world." "He does have a lot of connections," Veronica agreed, resuming her chopping. "It's good for his business." "I'm sure it is," Marcus murmured, his mind racing. How many of those connections were actually lovers? How many other husbands had Chad cuckolded? As they ate dinner, Marcus played his part perfectly. He complained about work stress, praised Veronica's cooking, and even managed to laugh at her jokes. All the while, he was cataloging every micro-expression, every slight hesitation in her responses. "So," he said casually as they cleared the table, "any plans for the weekend?" Veronica shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "Oh, you know, the usual. Yoga, maybe some shopping." "Nothing exciting." Marcus nodded, filing away the lie. "Sounds nice. I might have to go into the office for a bit. This new project is really demanding." "Of course it is," Veronica muttered, a hint of bitterness in her tone. Marcus pretended not to hear, but inwardly his anger flared. How dare she act put upon when she was the one betraying their vows? As they settled in for a night of mindless TV, Marcus's mind was working overtime. He had a lot to do, and not much time to do it. But one thing was certain. Veronica and Chad were going to regret the day they decided to cross Marcus' steel. The next day dawned bright and clear, a mockery of the storm brewing in Marcus's heart. He maintained a facade of normalcy, kissing Veronica goodbye as she left for work. Then he settled in to observe Chad, the 40-year-old personal trainer who lived next door. It didn't take long for Chad's true colors to show. As Marcus pretended to work on his laptop on the front porch, he watched Chad berate a young delivery person who'd brought him a package. "Are you freaking stupid?" Chad's voice carried across the lawn. "I said leave it by the garage, not the front door. What if it had rained?" The delivery person, a teenager by the looks of it, mumbled an apology and quickly moved the package. Chad watched with a sneer, his muscled arms crossed over his chest. "Yeah, that's right. Run along, you useless waste of space," Chad muttered, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus's grip tightened on his coffee mug. What the hell did Veronica see in this asshole? As the day progressed, Marcus found more reasons to despise Chad. He watched as the trainer yelled at a group of children playing too close to his precious sports car, threatening to call their parents if they so much as breathed on it. Later that afternoon, the neighborhood gathered for an impromptu barbecue. Marcus stood by the grill, expertly flipping burgers while keeping an eye on Chad and Veronica. Chad swaggered over, a beer in hand. "Hey there, desk jockey. Surprised to see you out in the daylight. Thought you'd burst into flames or something." Marcus forced a chuckle. "Just because I don't spend all day flexing in a mirror doesn't mean I'm a vampire, Chad." Chad's eyes narrowed slightly. "Right. Well, better be careful with all those burgers. Don't want to ruin that dad bod you've been working on." Before Marcus could retort, Veronica appeared at Chad's side. Now, boys. Play nice." She laughed, the sound grating on Marcus's nerves. "Just some friendly neighborhood ribbing," Chad said, his arms snaking around Veronica's waist. Marcus watched as his wife leaned into the touch, her eyes sparkling with admiration. As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself eavesdropping on Chad's conversations. The man was insufferable, boasting about how he manipulated clients into buying expensive supplements and booking extra sessions. "It's all about making them feel insecure," Chad was saying to another neighbor. "Once they think they're not good enough, they'll do anything to improve." "That's where I come in. Isn't that a bit unethical?" the neighbor asked hesitantly. Chad laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Ethics don't pay the bills, my friend. Besides, I'm doing them a favor. They want to look good. I help them look good. Everyone wins." Marcus watched as Veronica laughed too loudly at Chad's crude jokes, her hand resting on his arm far longer than necessary. It made him sick. "Hey, Marcus," Chad called out. "Why don't you tell everyone about that fancy building you're working on? I'm sure we'd all love to hear about. What was it again? Earthquake-proof houses?" Marcus gritted his teeth. "It's a revolutionary earthquake-resistant design for high-rise buildings. Actually, it could save thousands of lives in seismically active areas." Chad yawned theatrically. "Sounds thrilling. Almost as exciting as watching paint dry." The group laughed, and Marcus saw Veronica roll her eyes. "Oh, Chad," she giggled, playfully swatting his arm. "Don't be mean. Marcus works very hard." "I'm sure he does," Chad smirked, his eyes roving over Veronica's figure. "But all work and no play makes Marcus a dull boy, doesn't it?" As the party wound down, Marcus noticed something that made his blood boil. Chad and Veronica, thinking no one was watching, exchanged a secret hand signal. A small gesture, easily missed if you weren't looking for it. But Marcus was looking, and he saw everything. He watched as Chad's fingers brushed against Veronica's wrist, tapping out a pattern. Veronica responded with a subtle nod, her eyes darting quickly to Marcus before returning to Chad. In that moment, Marcus knew. This wasn't just a fling. This was a full-blown conspiracy, right under his nose, and he'd been too blind, too trusting to see it. That night, as Veronica slept soundly beside him, Marcus sat in his home office, the soft glow of his computer screen illuminating his determined face. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he created a secure, encrypted document detailing his discoveries and plans. He paused, rubbing his eyes. The betrayal still stung, but he pushed the pain aside. There would be time for that later. Right now, he needed to focus. Marcus pulled up a search engine, looking for private investigators in the area. He needed someone discreet, someone with a stellar reputation. After an hour of research, he found his guy. Ex-military, top reviews, known for his discretion. Perfect. He drafted a quick email. "Mr. Hawkins, I find myself in need of your services. Discretion is paramount. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss the details. Regards, Marcus Steele." Next, he drafted an email to his company's legal team. He needed to protect his new design, ensure that Veronica couldn't get her hands on it in case things went south. He hesitated for a moment before hitting send. There was no going back now. "Legal team, I've completed the preliminary designs for the earthquake-resistant structure. Given the sensitive nature of this innovation, I believe we need to take extra precautions to protect our intellectual property. Can we schedule a meeting to discuss patent applications and potential non-disclosure agreements for all involved parties? Best. Marcus Steele." As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Marcus began the process of creating a private trust for his assets. He'd be damned if Veronica and Chad got their hands on a single penny of what he'd worked so hard for. He created a new document outlining the structure of the trust. Steel Innovation Trust. Purpose: to protect and manage the intellectual property and assets related to Marcus Steele's engineering innovations. Beneficiary: Marcus Steele. Trustee: TBD, research reputable trust attorneys. Assets to be transferred: 1. Patents, pending and future. 2. Royalties from engineering designs. 3. Investment accounts. 4. Finally, exhausted but satisfied, Marcus crept back to the bedroom. Veronica was still asleep, her face peaceful. How could she look so innocent while plotting his death? Silently, he slipped a high-tech tracker into her purse. It was small, undetectable unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. And Veronica, in her arrogance, would never think to check. As he slid back into bed, Veronica stirred. "Everything okay, honey?" she mumbled, half asleep. Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Everything's fine, dear. Just fine." "Did you come to bed at all?" she asked, her eyes still closed. "Of course," Marcus lied smoothly. "Just got up early to do some work. You know how it is with this new project." Veronica made a non-committal noise, already drifting back to sleep. Marcus watched her, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. Little did Veronica know, the game was already changing, and Marcus Steele was playing to win. He had been underestimated his entire life, by his parents who thought he'd never amount to anything, by his professors who said his ideas were too ambitious, by competitors who thought they could outsmart him, and now, by his own wife and her lover. Well, they were all about to learn a valuable lesson. Marcus Steele didn't just play the game. He rewrote the rules. As he lay there, feigning sleep, Marcus began to formulate his next moves. He'd need evidence, irrefutable proof of their affair and their murderous intentions. He'd need to secure his finances, his work, his future. And most importantly, he'd need to make sure that when he struck, it would be swift, decisive, and utterly devastating. Veronica and Chad thought they were so clever, so superior. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. The hunt was on, and he was the predator now. Marcus Steele stood in the kitchen, his face a mask of practiced concern as he broke the news to Veronica. "Honey, I'm sorry, but I have to go on a business trip. It's last minute, but crucial for the project." Veronica's eyes widened, a flicker of excitement quickly suppressed. "Oh, how long will you be gone?" "A week, maybe 2, Marcus replied, watching her closely. "It's a big deal. Could really put us on the map." Veronica nodded, her lips curving into a sympathetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, darling. Your work is important. I'll manage here." Marcus turned away, ostensibly to pack, hiding the cold smile that threatened to break his facade. Veronica's poorly concealed excitement was all the confirmation he needed. The bitch couldn't wait to have him out of the house. As he zipped up his suitcase, Veronica leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You know, this might be good for us. Absence makes the heart grow fonder and all that." Marcus nodded, shouldering his bag. "You're right. Maybe we both need some time to appreciate what we have." He kissed her cheek, the gesture as hollow as their vows, and headed out the door. In the rearview mirror, he watched Veronica wave goodbye, her other hand already reaching for her phone. Probably texting Chad, he thought bitterly. Instead of the airport, Marcus drove to a nondescript hotel on the edge of town. As he checked in, he couldn't help but smirk. Veronica thought she was so clever, but she had no idea what was coming. In his room, Marcus set up his laptop, connecting to the tracker he'd planted in Veronica's purse. For hours, he watched the blinking move around town. Yoga class, lunch with friends, a stop at the mall, all perfectly innocent. Then, as evening fell, the dot began moving towards the outskirts of town. Marcus's jaw clenched as he watched it come to rest at the Starlight Motel, a seedy establishment known for its hourly rates and no questions asked policy. "Got you, you cheating bitch," he muttered, grabbing his keys. The Starlight Motel was even more depressing in person. Peeling paint, flickering neon, the whole 9 yards. Marcus parked across the street, his rental car innocuous in the shadows. He didn't have to wait long. A familiar sports car pulled into the lot, and Chad emerged, looking around furtively before heading to room 12. Moments later, Veronica's car arrived. She hurried to the same room, giggling as Chad pulled her inside. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Part of him wanted to storm over there, to confront them, to make them pay. But no, he had to be smart about this. He had to be patient. He pulled out his phone, dialing the number of the private investigator he'd hired. Mr. Hawkins? They're at the Starlight Motel, room 12. Get me everything you can. Hours passed. Marcus watched as other cars came and went, their occupants engaged in their own sordid affairs. Finally, close to midnight, Veronica emerged, her hair mussed, clothes askew. Chad followed, grabbing her ass as she got into her car. Marcus started his engine, following at a discreet distance as Veronica drove home. He watched her enter the house, watched the lights go on and off. All the while, his mind raced with plans and possibilities. His phone buzzed. A text from Hawkins. Got audio? You need to hear this. Marcus drove back to the hotel, his heart pounding. In his room, he opened the audio file Hawkins had sent, his stomach churning as he listened. Veronica's breathy voice filled the room. Oh, Chad, that was amazing. I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore. Chad's smug reply made Marcus's blood boil. Soon, baby. Once we take care of your hubby, we'll have it all. His money, his house, everything. You really think we can pull it off? Veronica asked, a note of worry in her voice. Trust me, Chad assured her. I know a guy. Ex-military. He can make anything look like an accident. Marcus won't know what hit him. Marcus sat back, his mind reeling. It was one thing to suspect, another to hear it confirmed. They were really planning to kill him, to take everything he'd worked for. As the full weight of their betrayal sank in, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The last traces of love, of sentimentality, burned away, leaving nothing but cold, ruthless determination. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd show them just how dirty he could get. As Veronica and Chad plotted his demise, Marcus worked tirelessly to secure his future. In his hotel room, surrounded by laptops and stacks of documents, he waged a silent war against those who sought to destroy him. First on his list, protecting his assets. Marcus had always been meticulous with his finances, a trait Veronica had often mocked. Now, that meticulousness would be her downfall. He spent hours on the phone with his lawyer, finalizing the transfer of his assets to the private trust he'd set up. Every penny he'd earned, every investment he'd made, all of it would be out of Veronica's reach. You positive about this, Mr. Steele? His lawyer asked, concern evident in his voice. It's a drastic step. Marcus's laugh was hollow. Trust me, Jack. It's necessary. Next, he turned his attention to his belongings. He couldn't empty the house. That would tip off Veronica. But he could secure the essentials. Under the guise of needing some files for his business trip, Marcus returned home while Veronica was out. He moved quickly, efficiently, packing away important documents, family heirlooms, and irreplaceable mementos. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice how little of the house actually felt like his. Veronica's taste dominated every room, her presence suffocating even in her absence. Good riddance, he thought, zipping up his bag. Back in his hotel room, Marcus drafted an anonymous tip to the police. He stared at the computer screen, weighing every word carefully. It had to be detailed enough to warrant investigation, but vague enough not to be traced back to him. Potential murder plot? Overheard discussion of hiring a hitman. Victim: Marcus Steele. Suspects: Veronica Steele and Chad Blackwell. His finger hovered over the send button. Once he did this, there was no going back. But hadn't they already crossed that line? Hadn't they already decided his fate? He clicked send. With that done, Marcus turned his attention to the divorce petition. He'd been building his case meticulously, gathering every scrap of evidence, every damning photo and recorded conversation. Now, he laid it all out, a roadmap of Veronica's betrayal. As he worked, a notification popped up on his phone. An email from a headhunting firm he'd contacted. They'd found him a position, a prestigious engineering firm on the other side of the country, eager to bring his innovative designs on board. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Everything was falling into place. While Veronica and Chad thought they were so clever, he was already 10 steps ahead. He picked up his phone, dialing the headhunter's number. "This is Marcus Steele. I'd like to discuss that job offer." Veronica Steele was not having a good day. It had started with a call from her bank, informing her that a large transfer she tried to make had been denied. Confused and irritated, she logged into their joint account, only to find it emptier than Death Valley in a drought. "What the hell?" she muttered, frantically checking other accounts. Nothing. It was all gone. She tried calling Marcus, but it went straight to voicemail. Typical. The one time she actually needed to talk to him, he was unreachable. As the day wore on, her anxiety grew. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. When she heard a car in the driveway, she rushed to the window, relief flooding her as she recognized Marcus's vehicle. The relief was short-lived. Marcus walked in, his face an expressionless mask. Veronica forced a smile. "Honey, you're back early. How was the trip?" Marcus didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at her with cold, calculating eyes. It sent a shiver down her spine. "Marcus? What's wrong? Why isn't there any money in our accounts?" His laugh was harsh, humorless. "You mean, why isn't there any money for you to steal?" Veronica felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Veronica. It doesn't suit you." Marcus's voice was calm, controlled, but there was an undercurrent of rage that made Veronica take a step back. "I know everything. About you and Chad. About your little murder plot." Veronica's mind raced. How could he know? They'd been so careful. "Marcus, I don't know what you think you know, but—" "Save it." He cut her off. "I've got pictures. Recordings. Enough evidence to bury you and your boy toy 6 feet under. Figuratively speaking, of course. I'll leave the literal burial plots to you too." Veronica felt panic rising in her chest. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Marcus was supposed to be oblivious, helpless. Not this. "You're paranoid," she tried, grasping at straws. "You're imagining things. Maybe you need to see someone. Talk to a professional." Marcus's laugh cut her off. "Gaslighting, Veronica? Really? That's the best you can do?" Before she could respond, the front door burst open. Chad stormed in, his face red with rage. "What the hell did you do, Steele?" Marcus turned to Chad, his eyebrow raised. "Ah, the cavalry arrives. Tell me, Chad, how are your clients reacting to the news of your unethical practices?" Chad's face went from red to white in record time. You can't prove anything, can I?" Marcus's smile was all teeth. "You'd be surprised what people will say when they think no one's listening. Especially in seedy motel rooms." Veronica looked between the two men, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Marcus was supposed to be weak, pliable, easy to manipulate and easier to eliminate. But the man standing before her was none of those things. He was hard, cold, ruthless. For the first time, Veronica felt a flicker of fear. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone at your company what a paranoid, delusional bastard you are." Marcus's smile didn't waver. "Go ahead. In fact, let me save you the trouble." He pulled out his phone, showing them an email. "I've already informed them of the situation. Guess what? They're backing me 100%. Turns out, they're not too fond of employees who conspire to murder their top engineers." "Who knew?" Chad, never one for patience, snapped. With a roar, he lunged at Marcus, fists swinging. But Marcus was ready. He sidestepped smoothly, using Chad's momentum to send him crashing into the coffee table. As Chad lay there, groaning amidst the shattered glass, Marcus turned back to Veronica. "I've already filed for divorce. Don't bother contesting it. You won't win." Veronica felt tears welling up in her eyes. Not of sadness or remorse, but of pure, unadulterated rage. "You bastard," she spat. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Marcus's smile was cold as ice. "Oh, but it is, Veronica. It's been over for a long time. You just didn't know it." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Veronica and Chad to stew in the ruins of their failed plan. As the door closed behind him, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but he'd taken back control, and he'd be damned if he ever let anyone take it from him again. The clock on Marcus Steele's nightstand glowed an eerie 2:37 a.m. as he silently slipped out of bed. Veronica's sleeping form didn't stir. Good. He needed the element of surprise. Marcus moved through the darkened house like a ghost, gathering the last of his belongings. Each step was calculated, each movement precise. He'd planned this moment for weeks, and now, finally, it was time to execute. In the study, he paused, allowing himself one last look at the life he was leaving behind. Photos of happier times mocked him from the walls. What a fool he'd been. With practiced efficiency, Marcus placed a thick manila envelope on Veronica's desk. Inside were copies of every damning piece of evidence he'd collected. Photos of her trysts with Chad, transcripts of their murderous plotting, bank statements showing their attempts to drain his accounts. Let her choke on it, he thought grimly. Next, he booted up his laptop. Time for Chad to face some consequences of his own. Marcus had spent days compiling a list of Chad's clients, along with detailed accounts of his unethical practices. Now, with a few clicks, anonymous tips were sent to each of them. "Enjoy unemployment, you smug bastard." His final task was to send an email to his company's board of directors. He'd agonized over the wording for days, but in the end, simplicity won out. To the board, "I regret to inform you that due to personal circumstances, I must tender my immediate resignation. I've uncovered a plot against my life, orchestrated by my wife and her lover. All relevant evidence has been turned over to the authorities. I want to assure you that my work, including the earthquake-resistant design, remains the property of the company. I trust you'll put it to good use. It's been an honor working with you all. Sincerely, Marcus Steele." As he hit send, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was done. He was free. The sky was just beginning to lighten as Marcus loaded the last box into his car. He paused, looking back at the house that had been his home for the past 5 years. It should have felt bittersweet, but all he felt was relief. As he pulled out of the driveway, Marcus allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Veronica and Chad thought they were so clever, but they'd never seen him coming. Now, as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, Marcus Steele was driving towards a future they could never touch. Veronica Steele woke to an empty bed and an eerie silence. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. "Marcus," she called out, her voice echoing through the empty house. No answer. Panic rising in her chest, Veronica stumbled out of bed. She rushed from room to room, each empty space amplifying her growing dread. In the kitchen, a single sheet of paper on the counter caught her eye. Divorce papers. Her hands shook as she read the details, each word a nail in the coffin of her carefully constructed life. "No, no, no," she muttered, frantically dialing Marcus's number. Straight to voicemail. She tried Chad next. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy and irritated. "What? He's gone," Veronica hissed. "Marcus is gone, and he knows everything. What the hell are you talking about?" "He left divorce papers." He must have. Veronica's voice caught as she spotted the manila envelope on her desk. Oh God. She ripped it open, photos and documents spilling out. Their secret meetings, their private conversations, all laid bare in high-resolution color. "Chad, we're screwed," she whispered. "Calm down," Chad snapped. "He can't prove anything. We'll deny it all." But even as he spoke, Chad's other line beeped. Then again, and again. "Hang on," he muttered, switching over. Veronica paced the kitchen, her mind racing. How had Marcus found out? How long had he known? And more importantly, what was he going to do? Chad's roar of rage answered at least one of those questions. "That son of a bitch," he bellowed as he switched back to Veronica. "He sent everything to my clients. Everything. They're all canceling their contracts. My reputation is ruined. Veronica felt the walls closing in. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Marcus was supposed to be the victim, not them. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Through the window, she saw two police officers standing on her porch, their faces grim. "Mrs. Steele," one called out. "We need to ask you some questions about a reported murder plot." Veronica's world tilted on its axis. This was it, the end of everything. As the officers led her away in handcuffs, Veronica caught sight of her reflection in the hall mirror. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, pale, disheveled, defeated. "What have I done?" she thought. But it was too late for regrets now. Across town, Chad Blackwell was facing his own reckoning. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, each call bringing another cancellation, another angry client demanding answers. He tried accessing the joint account he and Veronica had set up, the one they'd planned to use after Marcus was gone. But the account was empty, closed, as if it had never existed. "Shit," Chad roared, hurling his phone against the wall. How had it all gone so wrong? Marcus was supposed to be weak, pliable, an easy mark. Instead, he'd outplayed them at every turn. As Chad sank to the floor, his empire crumbling around him, he realized a terrible truth. They'd underestimated Marcus Steele, and now they were going to pay the price. The San Francisco skyline stretched out before Marcus Steele, a glittering promise of new beginnings. From his penthouse apartment, he could see the Bay Bridge, the Transamerica Pyramid, and in the distance, the rolling hills that surrounded the city. It had been 6 months since he'd left his old life behind, and he hadn't looked back once. His phone buzzed, a news alert lighting up the screen. Revolutionary earthquake-resistant design garners international acclaim. Marcus smiled. His work was finally getting the recognition it deserved. And more importantly, it was going to save lives. Another buzz. This one an email from his lawyer. "Mr. Steele, I'm pleased to inform you that the divorce has been finalized. As expected, the judge ruled entirely in your favor. Your ex-wife will receive nothing from the settlement. Congratulations on your fresh start. Best regards, Jack Thompson." Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was over. Really, truly over. He poured himself a glass of scotch, savoring the rich, smoky flavor as he looked out over the city. In the reflection of the window, he saw not the broken man Veronica and Chad had tried to make him, but a survivor, a victor. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from his sister. "Just saw the news. Veronica and Chad are facing criminal charges for conspiracy to commit murder. Thought you'd want to know. You okay?" Marcus typed back a quick reply. "Never better." And it was true. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly free. Free from betrayal, free from deceit, free from the suffocating weight of a loveless marriage. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Marcus raised his glass in a silent toast. To new beginnings. To justice served. To the bright future he'd built for himself, brick by brick, from the ashes of betrayal. The Marcus Steele who had driven away from his old life 6 months ago was gone. In his place stood a man tempered by fire, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Let Veronica and Chad rot in their cells, he thought. He had a life to live, innovations to create, a world to change. Marcus Steele was just getting started. The applause was deafening as Marcus Steele cut the ribbon, officially opening the first building constructed using his revolutionary earthquake-resistant design. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Marcus remained calm and collected. This was his moment, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. And no one, not Veronica, not Chad, not anyone, could take it away from him. As he stepped up to the podium to give his speech, a news ticker caught his eye. Local woman and fitness trainer sentenced in murder-for-hire plot. For a moment, memories of his old life threatened to surface. The betrayal, the pain, the anger. But Marcus pushed them aside. That was the past. This, right here, was his future. With a satisfied smile, Marcus turned back to the crowd. They were waiting for him, eager to hear from the man who had revolutionized structural engineering. And he was ready to deliver. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice strong and clear. Today marks not just the opening of a building, but the dawn of a new era in construction. As he spoke, Marcus felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had faced the storm, weathered the betrayal, and come out stronger on the other side. The future was bright, and Marcus Steele was ready to embrace it with open arms.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Looking back, my life always felt meticulously planned, as if each chapter was carefully outlined before it began. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where stability reigned supreme. My parents stayed married for over 5 decades, and their relationship became my benchmark for a successful partnership. Naturally, I assumed my own marriage would follow a similar path: enduring love, unwavering trust, and a bond unshaken by time. When I first met Joyce at a friend's wedding, I believed that dream had finally started to unfold. For years, I thought we were building that ideal together. Joyce had a way of brightening the ordinary, her laughter filling the cracks of daily routine. We raised 2 kids, built a comfortable life, and created traditions I hoped would last forever. But lately, I'd begun questioning everything, trying to pinpoint where things had shifted. Were there signs I had missed? Or was I just clinging too hard to what I thought we had? I steered my trusty Jeep Cherokee down the open highway, the familiar hum of the engine filling the quiet moments between bursts of chatter from the back seat. My 2 kids, caught up in their usual debate over which movie to watch on the entertainment system, provided a steady background noise. Beside me, Joyce, my wife of 2 decades, stared silently out the window, her expression clouded with something I couldn't quite place. She had no idea what lay ahead. Joyce looks ordinary, not beautiful but not unattractive. Her light brown hair framed her face, setting off her blue eyes. Though her legs were a bit thick, I always loved them, along with her generously sized hips, a feature she tried to tone down over the years but never could. She was slimmer on top, which wasn't my preference, but it didn't matter. I loved Joyce, flaws and all, ever since I first saw her 21 years ago. Back then, I was 20 and she was 22. I knew she was the one I'd marry, but today would be our last day together. The kids knew, but Joyce was clueless. We were headed to our favorite state park for a final family picnic before Brian left for his sophomore year, and our daughter set off for her senior year exchange program in Europe. Tomorrow morning, I was supposed to be leaving for a business trip, but in truth, I was just leaving. As the kids settled into their movie, we started the 2-hour drive. Joyce loved these picnics, where we could escape the hustle at home and enjoy each other's company in a peaceful setting. She liked the park even more because I never took my Mustang there. It wasn't suited for rough roads and had a small back seat that wouldn't fit the kids. Joyce had been jealous of the Mustang from the start, calling it my 3rd child, and later my 2nd wife. I joked that I needed a 2nd wife since she was always busy with her events and activities. I glanced at her relaxed face as we drove. I reached for the radio and turned it on. A Fleetwood Mac song came on, and though I didn't immediately recognize it, the signature beat by Mick Fleetwood and John McVie's strong bass line soon gave it away. Years ago, I played guitar in heavy metal bands. Before that, my parents made me learn classical piano to teach me discipline and structure. Music became a key part of my life, helping me through tough times. Even now, I can't start my morning run without my iPod. The music I choose sets my mood and influences my daily decisions, often reflecting what I'm feeling. This time, the song was almost prophetic. Little Lies by Fleetwood Mac, not one of my favorites, felt painfully fitting. Just as Christine McVie started singing, Joyce changed the station. If I could turn the page in time, I'd turn over in just a day or 2, the lyrics went. Leave it, I told her. Close my eyes, echoed Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. Christine's voice sang of believing, which mirrored our situation. Tell me lies filled the car, almost as if the band was with us. In the rearview mirror, my daughter caught my eye. She understood the song's weight. She returned to her movie, and Joyce looked out the window as I thought about what those words meant to me, to us. I'd always loved Joyce deeply. She wasn't a stunning beauty, but her personality and positive spirit drew me in when we met. Our shared life made me think no one else could ever matter. Until 2 weeks ago, when I discovered her affair with Matt Blake. Christine's lyrics about turning back time resonated. If I could, I'd change the day Joyce met Matt and the day she first betrayed me. But I couldn't. So I gave her this day. One last perfect day with the family she said she loved. One more day with the husband she had betrayed. A final idyllic picnic at her favorite spot before everything fell apart. As I drove, she reached for my hand. "I love you, Bill," she said with a smile. Sometimes I forget to show it, but never doubt it. My daughter let out a sarcastic snort from the back seat. I couldn't tell if it was because of her movie or something her mom said. The thought crossed my mind. Sweet little lies. "I think it's because you're all so busy with school, work, and activities. I'm stuck at home feeling like I have no life. That's why my groups and charities matter so much," Joyce said. "Why not just get a dog, Mom?" my daughter chimed in. I stayed quiet, lost in how Stevie Nicks' voice could still give me chills after all these years. She still looked good too, even at 50 or more. "You understand, don't you, Bill?" Joyce asked. "Sometimes you realize you can't just watch, you have to act." "Oh, he understands more than you know," Jessica said from the back. "No arguments today, Jess," I replied. "Let's just enjoy this day together. No fights, no negativity." Joyce nodded, smiling. My eyes met Jessica's in the mirror. She bit her lip and said, "Okay." Joyce squeezed my hand and leaned on my shoulder. She moved to kiss me, but I turned to read the passing sign, smoothly avoiding it. Jessica's giggle told me she noticed. I had to act the part of the devoted husband for the rest of the day. If I didn't, this final gift to Joyce would be ruined. While we ate, I wondered why she did it. Had she stopped loving me? Or did she never treat me as I treated her? Maybe, as she said, we were all busy and she wasn't. But that was her choice. She decided the rat race wasn't for her. She chose to be a stay-at-home wife. Joyce picked our house, the cars, the kids' schools. She set the vacations and plans. If she was unhappy, she could have said so. I also wondered, what did Matt Blake have that I didn't? Was it just his age? Though with his receding hairline, you'd barely guess he was younger. He was 35. I was 40. Not a big difference. I wasn't an Olympic athlete, but I stayed in decent shape. Matt, on the other hand, was soft and out of shape, so it likely wasn't about looks. Thankfully, after my suspicions were confirmed by investigators, I did a DNA test to be sure. My kids were indeed mine, though it was obvious from their appearance. Brian, who looks just like I did at his age, has already found the girl he wants to marry, Maggie Chu, a petite Asian girl he met at school. I wonder if he trusts her as much after our conversation about his mother. Brian, unlike Jessica and me, struggles to hide his emotions. He loves Joyce, but is furious with her and can't bring himself to speak to her. Jessica, on the other hand, is so angry she's itching for a confrontation. She's my biggest worry today. Jessica promised to behave during the picnic, but I doubt she'll keep it together the whole time. She's set to leave after I do tomorrow, and I suspect things will get interesting then. She has no respect for her mother and has already told me she wants to live with me when she returns from Paris in the spring. I told her she's always welcome, but at 17, a judge would likely decide that during the divorce. Divorce. The word stings. It's strange how a few letters can bring down everything you've built and hurt worse than any physical blow. As we arrived at the park, I paid the entrance fee at the booth. "Maybe we should get those plates that let us in without paying," Joyce suggested. "With the kids gone, I didn't think we'd come here much," I said. "This is our favorite spot," Joyce replied. "We'll come as often as we can, like always." "Just the two of us?" I asked skeptically. "Of course," she smiled. "There's no one I'd rather come here with." Even as she spoke, I could almost hear Stevie Nicks singing, "Tell Me a Lie," in that deep, soulful voice. Within minutes, we were unloading food, blankets, and supplies. "Jess, don't put the blanket too close to the grill," I called out. "Okay, Dad," she said cheerfully. "I only moved it closer to Mom because she was cold." "No, honey, I didn't say that," Joyce said. "You must be thinking of another time." Jessica, now beside me, whispered so only I could hear, "I was getting used to the weather in hell." I turned and looked at Jessica, realizing for the first time how much the family's breakdown was affecting the kids. I knew I was heartbroken, but they were suffering too. Brian had Maggie for emotional support, but even their relationship was strained due to Joyce's actions. He trusted Maggie less and grew more suspicious of her outings. Jessica, my little girl, was clearly dealing with anger. I needed to talk to the program director to arrange therapy for her and strengthen our connection. I also needed to move from the apartment I planned to a house. "Dad, ready for our stone-throwing contest at the lake?" Brian asked. It was our tradition, and while he won until he was 16, I had stopped letting him win after that. Lately, he was getting close to striking me. Maybe this year he would. Later, champ, I replied. Let's get the grill going first. He nodded, smiling, and pulled out his phone to call Maggie. Dad, there's no signal here, he said, frustrated. I just laughed. Brian, let's race to the lake, Jessica shouted, sprinting off before Brian even noticed. For now, I was alone, facing the moment I dreaded all day. Joyce laid out a blanket and motioned for me to join her. I need to get the grill going, I said, but save me a spot. I've been looking forward to this all morning. My acting was getting better. Joyce wasn't the only one who could tell sweet lies. What happened next, though childish, was one of my best performances. Joyce blew me a kiss and I caught it, pretending to touch my face while subtly discarding it and stepping on it. She didn't notice and smiled. I wonder what you'd do with a real kiss, she said. We'll find out later, I replied. Those little lies were contagious. I'm going to look for wildflowers, she said. Have something ready when I get back. And if you see Jess, send her to join me. She loves picking flowers. I nodded as she walked away. She paused and turned back. Bill, I'm so glad you insisted I come today. There's nowhere I'd rather be. We need more time like this. Life has gotten so busy and we take each other for granted because we think we'll always be here. Let's go back to doing things together. She walked off smiling to pick flowers, the sweetest lie I'd ever heard. A tear slid down my cheek as I remembered how much I loved her, knowing that without my insistence, she'd probably be with Matt now. I set up the charcoal in one of the park's grills, soaking it in lighter fluid since self-igniting ones never work. Familiar routines let my mind drift. I remembered crying while watching the DVD the detectives gave me. Alone in my office while Joyce was at a charity meeting, I saw Matt come to our house a few days before, when the kids and I were gone. Charity starts at home, I thought bitterly. Joyce, after making sure no one saw, eagerly pulled him inside. The camera in the living room captured them on our couch drinking coffee, tension palpable. They exchanged small talk, making me wonder why Matt put up with it. Then Joyce made the first move, sealing any chance of forgiveness. She asked if her legs looked fat, mentioning that I loved them, but she thought they were old and heavy. He replied he couldn't judge from what he saw, and she lifted her skirt higher. What I see looks good, Matt said with lust, but it's hard to judge with incomplete information. Want to see the whole thing? Joyce teased, smiling. I knew from her expression what would happen next. She raised her skirt all the way. Oh, God, Matt muttered. Come and get it, Joyce invited. Matt leaned in, and their awkward, clumsy movements began. There was no grace, just an uncoordinated mess that looked almost comical. I wondered if, caught up in their passion, they realized how ridiculous they appeared. Did Matt know what his actions would cost him? He likely had no idea what was coming in 24 hours. As for Joyce, I hoped she'd find happiness in her new life. I resolved to handle this gracefully, without primal reactions. The better man had won. My only priority was ensuring my children were secure before stepping away. My lawyers would deliver the divorce and settlement terms. No negotiations. Joyce would accept my offer or get nothing. I offered Joyce very little in the settlement. If we went through a full-blown divorce, her reputation would be completely ruined. I would make sure her standing in the community was destroyed, forcing her to step back from her committees and charities. The kids wouldn't be affected. Brian would be across the country at school and Jessica would be in Paris. It would be easiest for Joyce to accept my terms and move on while I did the same. That day, sitting in my den, I was so engrossed in the scene unfolding on the screen that I didn't hear Jessica come in until she was right behind me. She gently wiped the tears from my face. Now you know, she whispered. I nodded silently, unable to find my voice. I wanted to tell you, Dad, but I couldn't do it without hurting you, Jessica confessed. How long have you known? I managed to ask, my voice tight. Since the beginning, she said. They flirted for months, but it only lasted 2 weeks. I overheard Mom telling Susan she was going to end it, so it should be over soon. It's too late, I said, the weight of my words settling heavily between us. Things changed the moment it started. Can't you forgive her, Dad? Jessica's eyes searched mine, hopeful yet cautious. Sorry, Angel. I'm not the forgiving type, I admitted. A small, bitter smile crossed her face. Good, I'm not going to forgive her either. Jessica, we need to handle this calmly, I said, my tone firm. Don't tell anyone or treat your mother differently. A penny for your thoughts? Joyce's voice startled me. I hadn't heard her approach. Maybe don't light this yet, she said, noticing the soaked coals. I took my second bag, removed the saturated coals, tossed them in the lake to prevent a fire, and set the fresh coals in the grill, lightly dousing them before lighting them. Come sit with me while we wait for the fire, Joyce said, smiling. I sat beside her, and she held my hand. Bill, on the way here, I had a thought, she said. We haven't discussed this, but we're starting a new chapter. We've had a great life so far, and I'm looking forward to the next phase. I don't think it's over yet. I looked at her like I didn't really get her point. Truthfully, I just wanted to be as far away from her as possible. I probably shouldn't have let my mind drift to watching that video of her and Matt. Just looking at her made me feel sick. All right, honey, I can tell you're confused, she said. Being here with the people I care about the most has given me a new perspective. And to be honest, what Jess said made me think. Our kids had grown up and moved out, and I felt old, unattractive, and useless. I guess I needed to bring some excitement back into my life. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this woman really about to admit to an affair? I'd never encountered anything like this before. What about my plans? What about my revenge? Damn, this ruined everything. So I joined all these pointless committees, thinking they'd make me feel better, but they only pushed us further apart. Whether we like it or not, we've grown distant over the past few weeks. I muttered, pretending to ponder her words. Just get to the part where you started hooking up with the bald 35-year-old janitor who still lives with his mom, I thought. It's been 2 weeks since we've had Zex, you know? She said, looking at me for a reaction. Of course, I thought. Why on earth would I touch you after seeing that video with Matt? No, honey, I hadn't noticed, I said, playing along with my own small lies. Well, I know you've been waiting for the day we could run around the house without clothes, she said. You always joke about burning my clothes, so I'd always be without clothes for whenever you want me. She smiled, but I guess that will have to wait. That'll have to wait until hell freezes over, I thought. We're not old enough to retire just yet, Bill, she said with a smile. I love you, and I want us to have another child. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I started choking and coughing. Joyce patted my back, trying to help me catch my breath. A whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind. Maybe she was already pregnant with Matt's child and wanted to pin it on me. I dismissed that. It was too soon to tell. Maybe she planned to get pregnant by Matt and pretend it was mine. Maybe she felt guilty and wanted to revive our bed life, which she had unknowingly wrecked. I didn't know. I didn't care. I just wanted to get through this last day and then move on. Surprisingly, Christine McVie's song popped into my head, and I found the answer there. The second verse goes, even though I don't make plans, I hope you understand there's a reason why. Joyce, let's not make plans right now. I hope you understand there's a reason I don't want to plan anything at the moment, I said, echoing the song's words. Oh, you want me all to yourself for a bit? She said with a smile. That's so selfish. Have you been having naughty thoughts about what we'll do when the kids leave? I just nodded and smiled. Like the song says, we'd be better off breaking up. Let's give that a try. Lately, Joyce brought out the worst in me. She placed my hand over her heart and pulled it to her chest. Right on cue, Jessica appeared. Are we going to grill anything or what? She asked. Dad, should my stomach suffer because of your hormones all day? I nodded, thankful for her interruption, and went to the grill. I put hot dogs, burgers, steaks, and some chicken breasts on it, along with a couple of salmon fillets wrapped in foil. Maybe I understand why you want just the two of us for a bit, Joyce said, sneaking up on me again. Dad, the lake's waiting, Brian called. I shrugged and followed him, Jessica trailing behind as the self-appointed judge. Brian's first stone almost hit a log some kids had dragged to the middle of the lake. It was a solid throw, and he grinned at it. Top that, Dad, he said, smiling. I picked up a rock, still thinking of Matt's bald head and pale face. When I threw it, I pictured punching him square in the face. Whoa, Dad, Brian shouted. Where did that come from? Your rock flew over the log. It went halfway across the lake. Both he and Jessica stared at me, surprised. Let's eat, I said, trying to sound upbeat. We shouldn't leave your mom alone for too long. Yeah, or we might catch her with the forester, Jessica joked. I was startled, but Brian just laughed. Back at camp, only the hot dogs were ready, so we ate those. After lunch, Brian said he was full and went to nap in the Jeep. Joyce wanted to show Jessica the wildflowers, but Jessica asked me to walk with her instead. Joyce, never one for hiking, set off to pick her flowers. As we walked, I I tried to explain to Jess that what was happening between Joyce and me had nothing to do with her. I told her that we would always be her parents and that we both loved her. I also tried to make her understand that her mother would need her support in the days ahead because it would be hard for her when she realized I was gone. "Why should I help the woman who destroyed our family?" Jessica asked. I didn't really have an answer, so I just said, "Because she's your mother and you love her." "Dad, men don't notice anything," Jess said. "If there's something right in front of them, they don't see it unless it's work, football, or cars. But girls and women notice the smallest things. Probably half the girls I know see it too. It's embarrassing." I stopped and just looked at her. "I love you, Daddy," she said. "In the spring, when I come home from school and during Christmas break, I'll come stay with you." The rest of the day flew by. We played a lot of family games, tossed a frisbee around, and looked at the clouds, trying to spot shapes. We ate a lot and even went with Joyce to see her favorite wildflowers. When we were tired from picking flowers, we returned to camp for dinner. My son almost ruined everything himself. "It's hard to believe we'll never do this again," Brian said. "Of course we will," Joyce said, and Brian, Jess, and I stared at her in shock. "But what I meant was—" Brian tried to correct himself. "I know what you meant, honey," Joyce said. "Maybe next time you can bring Maggie. And maybe Jessica will bring someone too. Then maybe you and Maggie will make me a grandmother. But we'll always come here. It's a family tradition." She nudged me with her elbow and added, "So that might make it even better?" Brian smiled, relieved he hadn't spilled the secret. Joyce leaned in to kiss me, not noticing the angry look Jessica shot at her older brother. I've lost count of how many times I kissed Joyce over the years, but this kiss felt different. It was like the sadness in Brian's words made her put more into it, as if she believed our whole relationship depended on this one moment. "Have you thought about my proposal?" she asked, her eyes full of hope. Her eyes were so full of love, adoration, and passion that for a split second, I almost forgot my anger. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. When I looked into Joyce's eyes, I saw love. For a fleeting moment, I thought about having one last night with her. Maybe her wish could come true. But then I realized that if she got pregnant, I'd never be able to walk away from my child. Besides, I hated the idea of her raising my kid in Matt's mom's basement. As we loaded the Jeep, the sky grew darker. We yawned as we set off for home. The return trip would take longer since we needed to drop Brian at the airport. He was catching a red-eye flight back to college to spend an extra day with Maggie before classes resumed. Maggie had already returned that afternoon, and I don't think she knew he was coming. I suspected Brian wanted to surprise her late at night, to see if she was there, and more importantly, if she was alone. Damn Joyce for shattering our children's lives with her deceit. Her insecurities and boredom had caused so much damage. None of us would ever be the same. Our family was broken. I really hoped Matt was worth it. "Can you drive, sweetheart?" Joyce asked. "I'm fine," I replied. "I just have a lot on my mind." "Oh," she said. "Have we made a decision?" I was thinking about other things, but I decided one more sweet lie wouldn't hurt. I wanted to make her as happy as possible for this last day together. The whole point of today was to capture a glimpse of the life we should have had, to create one last memory of the love that had defined most of our adult lives. "I'm trying to think of names," I whispered. Her expression was priceless. It was a mix of love, adoration, and passion, the look she always gave me until 2 weeks ago, when she started her affair with Matt. After that, all I saw was guilt and doubt. "Are we starting tonight, baby?" she whispered. "We should probably wait until I get back from my trip the day after tomorrow," I said. "We don't want Jessica to hear us, and that would be awkward." As we drove home and stopped at the airport, I felt conflicted. Joyce seemed like her old self again. The way she kept holding my hand showed that, despite everything, she still loved me. Maybe, as she suggested, it was just boredom and loneliness that had made her lose sight of what truly mattered. Was this a forgivable mistake in a strong marriage that I was blowing up due to my pride and insecurities? I needed to sort out my feelings. Most men, myself included, don't process emotions well. Women do. Men react on instinct first, then analyze and follow logic. My first instinct was to cut Joyce out of my life completely, and my logical side told me that if she did it once and got away with it, she'd probably do it again. Both instinct and logic were urging me to move on. No matter what my heart said, I wasn't willing to spend my life at the mercy of her whims. Life's too short not to be happy. At the airport, Joyce and Jess dozed off while I dropped Brian off. I slipped him some cash, even though he already had a debit card for expenses. I hugged him tightly. Dad, don't forget, email me as soon as you know which office you're transferring to. Jess and I are planning on going to Hawaii. I'll bring Maggie for Christmas, but we'll be at her parents' for Thanksgiving. That should give you time to get the new place ready, he said. But keep me posted. Thanksgiving on the beach sounds awesome. Brian, what if your mom and I are still together? I asked. He gave me a skeptical look. Then Christmas will probably be awkward, with you checking under the tree to see if her boyfriend left her gifts, or if she invited him over, counting chairs at the table, and constantly watching the chimney to make sure she's not flirting with Santa Claus. I love you, Dad. Just do what you need to do. We'll support you, whatever you decide. He gently stroked Jessica's head and kissed her lightly. Don't tell her I did that, he said with a grin, then walked to the terminal, no longer just my son, but a grown man. I got back in the car and started driving home. Joyce, half asleep, reached for my hand, and Jessica snored softly in the back. Even in her sleep, Joyce instinctively reached for me. Love you, Billy, she murmured. This only deepened my confusion. How could a woman tell me she loved me even in her sleep? Could that be faked? Another thing struck me. The way she acted around Matt was different from how she was with me. Maybe she was pretending with him. Or had she been pretending with me for nearly 20 years? Was I really about to throw away 20 years of our lives because she'd slept with some loser twice? I started doubting my plan. It felt cowardly to leave without telling her why. Even a dog gets a newspaper smack to know not to mess up. Didn't Joyce deserve an explanation after 20 years? Didn't she deserve a chance to respond? Maybe it was my rational side coming through. The best way might be to make some coffee, invite Matt over, and have an adult conversation. What on earth was I thinking? She cheated. She didn't deserve anything. Wake me up when we get to the airport so I can say goodbye to Brian, she mumbled. We left the airport 20 minutes ago, I said. We'll be home in about 15 minutes. Joyce's eyes widened. Brian's gone? She asked. I nodded. But he didn't even say goodbye to me, she said, clearly hurt. He kissed me goodbye, Jessica said, twisting the knife. It's hard to pretend to sleep when your monkey brother's licking you. I guess that's his way of showing love. Go back to sleep, Jess, I said. Her smirk in the rearview mirror showed she had gotten what she wanted. He knew you were tired, honey, I told Joyce. He wanted to let you rest. He knows you'll have to work even harder on those committees since you took today off to be with us. I need to be with you, she said. No committees, no charity events, no projects. Just the one we're going to do together. Was this just another lie, or was she being honest? I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I pulled into the driveway and carried Jessica to her room. Love you, Daddy, she murmured. Forever and ever. I love you too, my little angel, I said as I turned to leave. Don't forget to call me when my plane lands so I can hear how she reacted, she said. Suddenly, her eyes were wide open and alert. And Dad, I'll live with you. In our state, kids over 13 can choose which parent they want to live with. I'm 17, so pick Hawaii because I look great in a bikini. Claudia and I get along great. I wondered why she mentioned Claudia. Jess, if you weren't asleep, why did I need to carry you up the stairs? I asked. Because today is the last time for some things, she said softly. I remember when I was little and felt so safe when you carried me up those steps and tucked me in. Neither of us will ever be in this house again after tonight, so I wanted to feel it one last time. I just nodded. Maybe it'll be another house. Or maybe someday you'll see me carrying my granddaughter up the stairs in your house, I said. Yes, that would be great, Dad. And you can tell her why she doesn't have a grandmother, she said bitterly. Who knows, I said. Maybe we can still fix this. No, Dad, she said seriously. You can't. You're not that person. And if you were, you wouldn't be the dad I love and respect. It's time for you to start fresh with someone who truly loves you. Maybe someone's already waiting for you. I returned to the car, where Joyce was still snoring. I opened the door and lifted her out. Her arms instinctively wrapped around my neck as I carried her to our room. I laid her on the bed, undressed her, covered her with a blanket, and kissed her one last time as the day came to an end. Love you, Billy, she said as I lay beside her. Is it true or just a sweet lie? It didn't seem to matter anymore. Love you too, Joyce, I said, as the last tear I'd ever shed for her rolled down my cheek. I lay in the bed we'd shared since the start of our marriage. It felt symbolic to be here, considering the end, almost as if I was closing a chapter. Questions raced through my mind as I tried to sleep. Was I being rational? Should we try to fix things? Did I love her enough to try? Had she and Matt been in this bed? The thought made me furious. Did she really choose that loser over me? Or was he just there when she was vulnerable? I had worked my entire life to give her everything she wanted, and this was how she repaid me. Somehow, I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of Joyce and Matt living in my house with my kids while I was stuck in his mother's basement. I was up before sunrise, showered, dressed, and packed my suitcase with all my personal items. I walked quietly down the hall and hugged my daughter goodbye. "I love you, Dad," she said, forcing herself to wake up. "The adventure begins," she smiled. "See you in a couple of months, or maybe sooner. Say hi to Claudia for me." Jessica would head to the airport in about 3 hours. After that, Joyce would be alone for the first time in her life. I hoped that whatever came next, Matt could make her happy. The surprises I had planned for them would test that love, I thought with a grin. I climbed into my Mustang, took one last look at the house, and started the car. The powerful engine roared, and a part of me felt sad. The end of my marriage felt like failure. But I was also ready for what the future might hold. On the way to the airport, I called the office. I planned to leave a message for Claudia, my former assistant, but couldn't reach her voicemail. I dialed the main office number and surprisingly got an actual person instead of a recording. "This is Ellen Magnuson, telephone operator and receptionist," she said. I was shocked she was at the office at 6 a.m. "I'm always here at this time," she added. "Ellen, I need to leave a message for Claudia Denton," I said. "Claudia no longer works here," Ellen replied. "She left yesterday." "Where did she transfer to?" I asked. "I don't have that information," she said. This surprised me. Claudia had been almost like a second wife for the past 10 years. I'd hired her right out of college, and she was the perfect assistant. I regretted treating her poorly. I'd been too caught up in my issues with Joyce to realize it. I decided I'd take a few days to find out where she'd gone and get in touch with her. With that resolved, I drove to the transport company I'd contracted with. Naturally, I chose the Honolulu office as my new location. Jessica had no influence on that decision, but I was glad it would make her happy. I drove my Mustang to the transport company near the airport. They were supposed to ship my car to the coast and ferry it to the island, where it would arrive about a day after me. I took a shuttle from the transport office to the airport, checked in, and waited at the terminal for my flight. About 15 minutes later, a woman sat beside me. Without looking up from my magazine, I noticed she had a familiar, pleasant scent. Her legs were slim and well-toned, not as thick and hot as Joyce's, but likely more appealing to most men. My gaze traveled up to her small waist and larger chest, proportionally accentuated on her petite frame. "It's not polite to stare at a stranger's chest," she said. "Besides, aren't you married?" "I was," I replied. "Now I'm open to new opportunities." "Shouldn't you be at work, Claudia?" I smiled. "You were the best assistant anyone could ask for." "I know," she said, smiling. "But now I'm open to new possibilities." "Claudia, you didn't need to leave the company because of me," I started. "I didn't leave," she said. "I'm just transferring to where you're headed." "How did you know when I was leaving and where I was going?" I asked. "First, I handled all your paperwork, remember?" She smiled. "Second, Jessica told me what was happening. She thinks we could be a good match and didn't want you to face this alone." I looked at her with suspicion, but she just smiled. "Bill, I've wanted to be more than just your assistant for a long time," she said. "Don't I deserve a chance too? I'm not asking for marriage or a commitment, just for us to take things one day at a time." I smiled and held out my hand. Joyce woke up when the phone rang for the 4th time. It went to voicemail after 3 rings. Whoever was calling so early really wanted to talk. She wondered why Bill wasn't answering. He should have been up by now for his trip to the airport. She'd been having a wonderful dream about what she would do to Bill when he came home. She couldn't believe she'd managed to keep her relationship with Matt hidden. She had it all, a husband who supported her lifestyle and a young man who adored her. Life was perfect. "Hello?" she answered sharply. "Joyce, it's me, Matt," came the voice on the other end. "I can't come today. Maybe never," he slurred. Damn, he sounded drunk. Why is he drunk so early? She thought. To hell with it. I decided to end things with Matt yesterday anyway. There was no future with him. She loved Bill deeply. The picnic had reminded her of that. Now that they were planning another child, she didn't need the distraction Matt provided. It had just been a midlife crisis. Maybe there would be others, but as long as she was careful, Bill would never know. "I love you, Joyce," Matt said, his voice breaking. Are you crying, Matt? She asked. Great, she thought. Just what I needed. This fool is trying to make it difficult to break up. It's so annoying. Some people can't recognize when it's over and ruin everything, thinking they can hold on forever just because they want to. He needs to move on. It's over, Joyce. I feel terrible, he whined. What's wrong, Matt? She asked, just to be polite. Are you sick? Hurt? She was relieved her husband wasn't as pathetic as Matt. What did I ever see in him? He's not attractive, fit, or smart. He has no ambition and still lives with his mom. And he's awful in bed. She'd chosen him because no one would suspect her, and he posed no threat to Bill. She thought she could teach him to satisfy her. But before anything serious started, she realized she loved Bill too much to go through with it. My mom's going to eliminate me, Matt said. We have a problem, Joyce. I love you, but I can't take this anymore. It's not worth it. What are you talking about? Joyce wondered, now irritated. This morning I went in for my shift at the supermarket. I thought I could earn an extra $10 helping unload trucks, Matt explained. I wanted to use that money to buy you a gift, to show how much I care. But when I got to work, they sent me to the manager's office. His voice wavered. He said they have a policy against employees fraternizing with customers, especially married ones, and they had to fire me to avoid a lawsuit. I lost my job, Joyce. I'd worked there since high school, and they just let me go. He started crying again. As I rode my bike home, I started wondering if someone had found out about us and was trying to stir up trouble. I had just passed the alley behind the store and began pedaling faster when, out of nowhere, a big teenager came out of the alley and hit me so hard I fell off my bike. When I got up, he was gone, and so was my bike. I headed home, but not long after, 2 large men attacked me. They knocked me badly. The entire time, they kept saying I should have known better than to mess with a married woman. I woke up in the hospital, and my mom was there. She told me to call you and tell you to stay away from me, Joyce, but I'll always love you. The call ended, leaving Joyce with nothing but a dial tone. She didn't know whether to laugh with relief or cry out of guilt for what had happened to Matt. She was certain Matt's mother was behind all of it. It seemed like her version of tough love. She must have discovered Joyce was married and took it upon herself to teach her son a lesson. Instead of grounding him or taking away privileges, she got him fired, arranged for his bike to be stolen, and since he was too old for a spanking, hired thugs to knock him up. Maybe this was for the best, she thought, because her heart belonged to the only man who truly mattered to her. There was no place for Matt in her life. She decided to make breakfast. Maybe I'll take Jessica to the airport myself. Jess wanted to prove she was independent by taking a cab, but we needed time to bond. Joyce had felt some tension between them during the picnic and wanted to address it. Until recently, they'd been a close family, but now something felt off. At least things seemed better with Bill. Yesterday had been perfect, and she had done everything she could to show him she loved him wholeheartedly. After a couple of weeks of flirtation with the idea of an affair, she felt sure he trusted her again. When Joyce entered the kitchen, she noticed a large envelope on the table. Just as she started to open it, a car horn sounded outside. She looked out the window and saw a taxi waiting. Joyce opened the envelope as she heard footsteps from upstairs. Jessica was coming down. As Joyce read the note inside, a chill went down her spine. Press play on your DVD player, then read page 2, it said. Joyce pressed play and watched in horror as footage of her latest encounter with Matt played on the living room TV. Jessica walked past and said, Goodbye, Mom. I hope you enjoyed your last day with Dad. He wanted you to have a beautiful memory, but you won't see him or me again. Joyce looked back at the letter. At first, she thought it was from Matt's mother, but as she continued reading, her worst fears came true. Goodbye, Joyce. I hope Matt was worth losing your husband, your marriage, and your family. I loved you deeply, and your betrayal broke me. In a few minutes, someone will arrive with divorce papers. You need to sign them as soon as you get them. If you sign, we will proceed with an uncontested divorce citing irreconcilable differences. My lawyer will reach out about custody arrangements for Jessica. You'll receive 25% of our shared assets, including the house, which is already up for sale. You have 30 days to find a new place to live. I sincerely hope Matt has room for you in his basement. If you refuse to sign, I will ruin your reputation so badly that staying in this town won't be an option. The money is generous, considering the life we had that you destroyed for reasons I can't fathom. I don't want to see, hear from, or talk to you ever again. So I'll never know why you did it. And it doesn't matter. Yesterday was bittersweet, and I struggled to consider if we could make it work. I thought I might be able to forgive, and I never stopped loving you, Joyce. But I can't forget what you did. I'll never trust you again. I couldn't live constantly wondering if meetings or shopping trips were excuses to see someone else. You've done this many times, haven't you, Joyce? Maybe not with Zex until recently, but you lied to my face, kissed me, and betrayed me. In the end, it wasn't a lack of love or my unwillingness to forgive that ended us. It was the lies. All those sweet little lies. Joyce felt hollow after reading the letter. She never expected this outcome or wanted it. The affair had only been out of boredom. Her lifelong dream was to be a wife and mother, and when she met Bill in college, she felt her dreams had come true. But as she got older, she felt life slipping by. The last few years were especially hard. The kids were almost grown. Brian already was, and Jessica was nearly there. They didn't need her anymore. Bill had his career, and even though he made choices to limit work travel so he could spend more time with the family, he was gone every weekday. He had Claudia, who managed everything for him at work so efficiently that Joyce never had to assist with anything related to his job. After Claudia's first couple of years working for Bill, Joyce's jealousy grew so strong she stopped inviting her to parties and social events. It didn't help that Claudia was younger and more attractive. One of Joyce's biggest frustrations came at a company dinner when someone asked, "Are Bill and Claudia married?" "They look great together," someone else commented. "And they work so well together, too," added another. Joyce began to suspect Bill might be having an affair with Claudia. The way Claudia looked at Bill made Joyce sure that if given a chance, Claudia would pursue him. Joyce hired a private investigator to find out the truth. After 3 months and spending a large portion of the money her late father left her on 24-hour surveillance, the agency concluded that Bill and Claudia's relationship was purely professional and friendly. There was nothing more between them. Joyce felt torn between relief and frustration. She had wasted so much money to confirm what she had always known, that Bill was faithful. He loved her and their kids too much to risk their family. Yet, she sometimes questioned why he loved her so deeply. Most of the time, Joyce knew she was smart, but she also knew she wasn't what men fantasized about. Her chest was average at best. She had a large backside, and her legs were so thick she needed custom-made boots. But Bill adored those traits. He would often whisper, "Wrap those thick legs around me while we make love." His desire for her seemed endless until 2 weeks ago. Suddenly, she realized she hadn't been discreet at all. Bill had probably known her suspicions from the start, and she was too naive to see it. She felt lost. She heard the sound of a car door closing outside. Looking out the window, she saw the taxi driver shutting the trunk after loading Jessica's suitcases. If anyone knew where Bill was and how to reach him, it was Jessica. She and her father were always close. Bill loved their son, but he cherished their daughter, and she loved him just as fiercely. Maybe that's why Jessica had been so cold and sharp with Joyce lately. It was clear she knew about Joyce's betrayal and expressed her disapproval through her frosty demeanor and biting comments. "Jessica, wait," Joyce called as her daughter stepped into the taxi. Jessica turned, looked at her mother, and simply raised her middle finger. Without a word, she got in and shut the door. The taxi drove off, and Joyce, still in her robe, ran after it down the street. She stepped on a sharp rock and cut her leg, hobbling back to the house. Just as she reached her front door, she heard a whistle from a neighbor's house. The old man across the street waved. "I need your help," Joyce said, pulling her robe closed. "Can I use your phone? You've had your cheap thrill looking, so you owe me that." The old man stood and walked to his house. Joyce followed, still glancing around, wary of any eyes on her. "The phone's there," the old man said. Joyce found the phone book under the table where the phone sat. She reached for it, but before she could open it, he closed it. She stared at him in surprise. "What?" she asked. "I have a question for you," he replied. She nodded for him to continue. "What's the opposite of good?" "It's bad," she said. "No," he answered. "The opposite of good is better. I had a good life, and I ruined it trying to make it better." He handed her a key. "What's this?" she asked, examining it. "The key to your house. Your husband gave it to me to water your plants and pick up your mail while you were on vacation." Joyce looked at him and said, "Thank you." She hurried back across the street and unlocked her door. She went straight to the phone and called Bill's cell. It went to voicemail. She wanted to leave a message, but didn't know what to say. She knew she had limited chances to tell him how sorry she was. She decided she would leave a message later, once she gathered her thoughts. If she accepted Bill's terms, she would be okay for a while. Their house was worth over $300,000, and 25% of that would be $75,000. It would sustain her temporarily, but it wasn't enough for long-term survival. She'd need to find a job and a new home. The money wouldn't last. Buying a comparable house would eat up her share within a couple of years, and her savings would run dry shortly after. Joyce had never worked. What could she even do? Her life was falling apart over nothing. She needed a way to get Bill to forgive her. The doorbell rang, and she stood up to answer it. "Joyce Williams?" asked a young woman with a briefcase. "Yes," Joyce said, wondering what she was selling. "You've been served," the woman said. "What?" Joyce said. "No, it's too soon. I'm not ready. I don't know what to do." "I need to return these papers with your signature," the woman said, looking bored. Joyce thought about everything she had done and all the people she had hurt with her careless actions. If Bill had dragged her reputation through the mud, more people would have been affected. She did the only thing she could do. She signed the papers. She closed the door behind the woman and collapsed at her desk, crying uncontrollably. 2 days and 4,563 miles later, Claudia stepped out of their hotel bathroom and touched Bill's shoulder as he cried over what Joyce had thrown away. "Things will get better, dear," she said, trying to comfort him, though she knew most people never truly forget their first marriage or the other parent of their children. In time, she and Bill would build a life together, maybe even have kids. But Joyce would always be a memory. So telling him it would get better was a little lie. On December 24th, Joyce walked through her old neighborhood, ignored by former friends and neighbors. Even her best friends next door avoided her while putting up Christmas decorations. Bill had kept his promise not to spread what she did, but Matt's mother told everyone, painting Joyce as the older woman who seduced her son. The gossip spread fast, leaving Joyce an outcast, only approached by unwanted suitors. Joyce knocked on the door of her last friend, an old lonely man who welcomed her in. "Trouble loves company, eh, Joyce?" he said. "Weren't you supposed to have your kids over for the holidays?" "I hoped so," Joyce replied bitterly. In just 3 months, she had become a stranger to herself, a far cry from the woman who had cheated on Bill. "Brian's grown now," she continued. "He and his fiancée decided to spend Christmas with Bill in Hawaii. They're enjoying the beach. He said he loved the idea of Christmas on the sand, with the whole ocean to throw stones into with his dad and Jessica. The court ruled we alternate holidays, so I had Thanksgiving and Bill got Christmas. Jessica asked to spend part of her holiday with Brian and Maggie, so she'll be with them for New Year's." Dan, who had been listening intently, raised an eyebrow. "So, Jessica didn't care," Joyce snapped. "She came because the court ordered it. She arrived Wednesday, went straight to bed, barely spoke Thursday, and left right after dinner. She flew to Hawaii, not back to Paris, to join them. I only found out when I called Brian and spoke to Maggie, who didn't know to keep it quiet." Joyce's eyes welled up. Maggie said it was the first time they'd all been together since Thanksgiving. They celebrated on Friday when Jess got there, even watching recorded football games together. I invited Bill to Thanksgiving, imagining him lonely, but instead, Maggie mentioned how great Claudia looked in a bikini. They celebrated on the deck of the house Bill bought for them. Claudia, not only built like a model, is also an amazing cook. She paused, biting her lip. I must be clairvoyant. I always knew that woman wanted Bill, so I hired detectives to watch them. They never met, and wouldn't have if I hadn't pushed him to her. I sent Bill a Christmas gift to remind him I was still here, but it was returned unopened with a big green sticker saying, "Parcels from this address are not accepted." Joyce's voice dropped. I called Bill's cell, which he had given me for discussing Jessica's matters since we share custody, though she chose to live with him. He waived child support because I don't work, which I thought was kind at first, but really it was so he wouldn't have to speak to me. He avoids any contact. Jessica's court-ordered visits are all I have, but she barely speaks or interacts when she's here. Joyce continued. I called Bill's phone and Claudia answered. I knew he was there and had handed her the phone. I heard Christmas music and people chatting, clearly having a good time. I asked Claudia if she was still Bill's assistant. I would never work for anyone else, she said. I asked what else she does for him, and she said, whatever he wants. I almost cried, but tried to be gracious. I asked if they got the gift I sent, and she said it might have been lost in the mail, downplaying it to spare my feelings. Then I realized I was on speakerphone because when I asked for Jessica, I heard her whisper, "No." I swallowed my pride and asked if I could visit for Christmas with their gifts. Claudia just said, "Oh wait, there's Jessica." Jess took the phone, and I told her I hadn't heard from her in a month. She said she'd been busy with school. When I asked what she wanted for Christmas, she said nothing. She told me she wanted me to keep being the best mom I could, and her dad and stepmom would handle the rest. Even though Bill isn't married to Claudia, she's already more of a mother to Jessica than I am. My own mom blames me too, always saying I was out of my mind. Maybe it was a midlife crisis, hormonal imbalance, or temporary insanity. Bill loves you, my mom said. Give him time. But time is running out and he's moving on. Now my mother blames me for not seeing her grandchildren. Claudia even flew my mom to Hawaii for Christmas since Bill's parents were there for Thanksgiving. Maggie meant the entire family when she said everyone would be together. Joyce's voice grew faint. Deep down, I believe Bill still loves me. That's why he hasn't married Claudia yet. But he's trying to forget me. He's with a younger, prettier woman, yet he still struggles to let go. He must have loved me deeply. He always said so. How did I get bored with that kind of love? Now I'm sitting here, bitter and gaining weight, knowing it's only a matter of time until he forgets me completely and marries Claudia. She sighed. Bill always said he could forgive the act, but not the betrayal. I lost my perfect life over a few small lies.
Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. Thanks for being here. We've got another juicy story for you. So let's get started. Shane Shields navigated his sedan through the quiet suburban streets, the satisfaction of a productive conference still humming through his veins. As a dedicated high school history teacher, he relished these opportunities to enhance his craft. The digital clock on his dashboard read 4:30 p.m. He was home earlier than expected, a rare treat that usually meant surprising his kids with impromptu ice cream runs. As he pulled into the driveway of the modest two-story house he shared with his wife Natalie and their two children, Shane noticed the curtains in the living room window flutter. He smiled, imagining his kids peeking out, eager for his return. He grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat, filled with notes and new teaching materials he couldn't wait to implement. Approaching the front door, keys in hand, Shane paused. Natalie's voice drifted through the partially open living room window. Her hushed tone made him furrow his brow. "Listen, Cynthia," Natalie said, oblivious to Shane's presence. "Once he's done paying for the kid's private school, I'm filing for divorce. Then I'll accuse him of domestic crime and live with Ryan and the kids off his money." Shane's hand froze on the doorknob. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as his brain processed the betrayal. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath the skin. For a moment, raw anger surged through him, urging him to burst through the door and confront her. But Shane was not a man of impulsive actions. He took a deep breath, forcing his racing heart to slow. His mind, usually occupied with lesson plans and historical dates, now whirred with a different kind of strategy. Without making a sound, he retreated from the door and walked back to his car. He got in, started the engine, and drove away, heading towards the nearby Oakwood Park. The park was quiet at this hour, with only a few joggers and dog walkers dotting the landscape. Shane found an empty bench overlooking the duck pond and sat down. He stared at the placid water, his reflection fractured by the gentle ripples. His hands, usually steady whether writing on a chalkboard or grading papers, trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone. He hesitated for a moment, then opened his contact list. His thumb hovered over Natalie's name before scrolling past it. Instead, he tapped on Amelia Hawthorne, attorney at law. As the phone rang, Shane's mind whirled with plans. He would need evidence. He would need to protect his assets. Most importantly, he needed to ensure his children's future. Amelia Hawthorne's office, a crisp voice answered. "This is Shane Shields," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I need to schedule an urgent appointment with Amelia. It's regarding a divorce." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I see, Mr. Shields. Ms. Hawthorne has an opening tomorrow at 7 a.m. Would that work for you?" Shane nodded, then remembered he was on the phone. "Yes, that's perfect. Thank you." As he ended the call, Shane noticed a young couple walking hand in hand along the pond's edge. They looked happy, carefree. He wondered if he and Natalie had ever truly been like that, or if it had all been an illusion. He stood up, straightening his shoulders. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, hard determination. As he walked back to his car, Shane began to formulate his plan. He would not be a victim. He would not let Natalie destroy everything he had worked for. By the time he pulled back into his driveway, the sun was setting. He took a moment to compose himself before entering the house. The sound of cartoons greeted him as he opened the door. Daddy, his 6-year-old daughter, Emily, came running, pigtails bouncing. He scooped her up, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hey, princess," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "How was your day?" As Emily launched into a detailed account of her kindergarten adventures, Shane's eyes met Natalie's across the room. She smiled, the picture of a loving wife. "Welcome home, honey," she said, approaching to give him a peck on the cheek. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour." Shane nodded, forcing a smile. "Sounds great. I'm just going to freshen up." As he climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Shane's mind was already racing ahead. He had a long night of planning ahead of him, but for now, he had to play the role of the unsuspecting husband. The game had begun, and Shane was determined to win. Over the next few weeks, Shane maintained a facade of normalcy that would have made any actor proud. He smiled at breakfast, asked about Natalie's day, and continued his routine of bedtime stories with the kids. But beneath this veneer of domestic tranquility, Shane was a man on a mission. Late one night, after Natalie had gone to bed, Shane carefully installed hidden cameras in strategic locations around the house. His hands were steady now, his movements precise. He positioned one in the living room, angled to capture the couch and the front door, another one in the kitchen, and a third in the home office. As he worked, Shane's mind drifted back to his first meeting with Amelia Hawthorne. The ruthless divorce attorney had listened intently as Shane laid out what he knew. Smart move, not confronting her immediately. Amelia had nodded approvingly. "We'll need irrefutable evidence. Keep recording conversations, document everything." And Shane, she leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Don't let her suspect anything. The element of surprise will be crucial." Shane had nodded, his expression grim. "I understand. I've already started gathering financial records. I'll get you everything you need." Now, as he carefully concealed the last camera, Shane felt a satisfaction. He was no longer the naive, trusting husband Natalie thought she could manipulate. The next morning, over breakfast, Natalie chatted animatedly about her plans for the day. "I've got a big meeting with a potential client," she said, buttering her toast. "It might run late, so don't wait up for me." Shane nodded, sipping his coffee. "Good luck with the meeting. I hope it goes well." As Natalie left, kissing him goodbye with practiced affection, Shane wondered how many of her late meetings had actually been rendezvous with Ryan. That afternoon, while Shane was ostensibly at work, he sat in his car a block away from their house. He watched as a sleek sports car pulled into their driveway. Ryan Blackwood, looking every inch the smooth-talking real estate agent in his designer suit, stepped out and sauntered to the front door. Shane's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he watched Natalie open the door, pulling Ryan inside with a giggle. He forced himself to breathe deeply, reminding himself that every moment of their betrayal was now being recorded. Inside the house, unaware of the hidden cameras capturing their every move, Natalie and Ryan made themselves comfortable on the living room couch. Ryan poured 2 glasses of wine, Shane's wine, a gift from a grateful parent. "Soon, we'll have it all," Ryan said, sipping the stolen wine. "Shane won't know what hit him." Natalie laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "He's too naive to suspect anything. It's almost too easy." Ryan pulled her close, his hand trailing up her thigh. "And once we've bled him dry, we'll start our new life together. Just think, Nat. No more pretending, no more sneaking around." Natalie's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "I can't wait. Sometimes I can barely stand to look at him, with his earnest talks about his students and his precious history lessons." "Well, soon you won't have to," Ryan assured her. "We'll take him for everything he's worth, and then some." Later that night, reviewing the footage, Shane's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of his desk, but his voice was steady when he called Amelia. "I've got more evidence. You're going to want to see this." The next day, Shane met Amelia at her office, handing over a USB drive containing the damning footage. "Excellent work, Shane," Amelia said, her tone businesslike. "This, combined with the financial records you've provided, gives us a strong case. But we're not done yet. Keep gathering evidence. The more we have, the stronger our position when we make our move." Shane nodded. "I understand. I'll keep you updated." As he left Amelia's office, Shane felt a mix of emotions. Anger at Natalie's betrayal, disgust at her and Ryan's callousness, but also a satisfaction. He was no longer a pawn in their game. He was taking control, and soon, they would learn just how badly they had underestimated him. As Shane methodically built his case against Natalie, an unexpected challenge arose at work. The school board called an emergency meeting to discuss budget cuts. The history department, deemed non-essential by some board members, was on the chopping block. Shane sat in the staff room, surrounded by his worried colleagues. The atmosphere was tense, filled with whispered conversations and nervous glances. "They can't just cut the entire department," Sarah, the American history teacher, said, her voice trembling. "What about our students?" Mark, who taught world history, shook his head glumly. "You know how it is. When budgets get tight, history is always the first to go. They'll keep math and science, maybe throw us a bone with a single social studies class." Shane listened to their concerns, his mind already formulating a plan. He stood up, drawing everyone's attention. "We're not going down without a fight," he said, his voice firm. "We need to show the board, the parents, everyone, why history education is crucial. Who's with me?" The room fell silent for a moment, then Sarah spoke up. "What did you have in mind, Shane?" Shane smiled, a spark of his old passion igniting. "We're going to organize, rally the parents, prepare a presentation for the board, show them exactly what they'd be losing if they cut our department." Over the next few days, Shane threw himself into the campaign to save the history department. He organized his colleagues, rallied supportive parents, and prepared a compelling presentation for the next board meeting. His nights, once filled with quiet despair over his crumbling marriage, now buzzed with a new purpose. One evening, as Shane pored over budget reports and drafted talking points, Natalie sauntered into his home office. She perched on the edge of his desk, her pose deliberately provocative. "Why are you spending so much time on this?" she asked, her tone a mixture of irritation and feigned concern. "It's not like your job matters that much." Shane bit back the cutting retort that sprang to his lips. Instead, he met her gaze calmly. "Every job matters, Natalie. Every person matters." Natalie rolled her eyes, oblivious to the irony of his words. "Whatever. Just don't forget we have dinner with the Andersons on Friday. Try to be on time for once." As she left, swaying her hips in a way that once would have captivated him, Shane turned back to his work. The dinner with the Andersons, Ryan's business partners, would go ahead as planned. It was all part of maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Friday evening arrived, and with it, the Andersons. Shane played the role of gracious host perfectly, pouring wine and engaging in pleasant small talk. His smile never wavered, even when Ryan Blackwood made a surprise appearance halfway through the meal. "Hope you don't mind me crashing the party," Ryan said with a wolfish grin. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." Shane noticed the quick, heated glance between Ryan and Natalie. He raised his glass in a toast, his voice steady. "The more, the merrier." "Welcome, Ryan." As the evening wore on, Shane observed the subtle touches, the lingering looks between his wife and her lover. He cataloged each one, adding them to the mountain of evidence he was accumulating. "So, Shane," Mr. Anderson said, swirling his wine glass, "Natalie tells us you're having some trouble at work. Budget cuts, was it?" Shane nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes, the school board is considering some reductions. But we're working on a plan to show them the value of maintaining a strong history department." Ryan chuckled, the sound grating on Shane's nerves. "Seems like a lot of effort for a subject most kids sleep through." "No offense, Shane." "None taken," Shane replied smoothly. "History might not be everyone's favorite subject, but understanding our past is crucial for shaping our future. It's about more than just memorizing dates and names." Natalie cut in, her tone dismissive. "Let's not bore everyone with shop talk, dear." Who wants dessert? As Natalie bustled off to the kitchen, Shane caught Ryan's appraising look. For a moment, he wondered if Ryan saw him as a rival or merely an obstacle to be removed. Either way, Shane knew he was more than ready for the challenge. Later that night, after their guests had left and Natalie had gone to bed, Shane sat alone in his study. He pulled out a small notebook and jotted down his observations from the evening. Then he opened his laptop and began composing an email to Amelia. "Another productive week," he wrote. "I think we're almost ready to make our move." He hit send, then leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the star-studded sky. A storm was coming, he knew, but this time, he would be the one controlling the lightning. As he closed his laptop, Shane's thoughts turned to the upcoming school board meeting. He had two battles to fight now, one at home and one at work, but he was determined to win both. He wouldn't let Natalie destroy his family, and he wouldn't let short-sighted bureaucrats destroy his passion for teaching. With renewed determination, Shane began to review his notes for the board meeting presentation. He had always taught his students about the great figures in history who had faced seemingly insurmountable odds and triumphed. Now it was his turn to embody that resilience and strength. As the night deepened, Shane worked tirelessly, his mind clear and focused. He was no longer just fighting for his job or his marriage. He was fighting for his future, for his children, and for the principles he held dear. And he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Shane Shields stood at the podium, his gaze sweeping across the packed auditorium. School board members, parents, and fellow teachers filled the seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. This was it, the moment that could make or break the history department. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, fighting to preserve the past while his own future hung in the balance. But unlike his personal life, this was a battle he could wage in the open. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, concerned parents, and colleagues," Shane began, his voice strong and clear. "We're here today to discuss more than just budget cuts. We're here to decide the value we place on understanding our shared history." As Shane launched into his carefully prepared presentation, he could see the board members leaning forward, their interest piqued. He laid out compelling statistics, shared moving testimonials from students, and painted a vivid picture of a future where historical ignorance led to repeated mistakes. By cutting the history department, Shane concluded, his passion evident in every word. "We're not just eliminating classes. We're erasing our children's connection to their heritage, their understanding of how we got here, and their ability to shape where we're going. I urge you to reconsider this decision. Thank you." The room erupted in applause as Shane stepped away from the podium. He could see several board members nodding approvingly, while parents turned to each other, engaged in animated discussions. As the meeting adjourned, the school superintendent approached Shane, a smile on his face. "That was quite a speech, Mr. Shields. I think you've given us all a lot to think about." Shane nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "Thank you, sir. I just hope it was enough." It wasn't until he was driving home that the full impact of the evening hit him. He had done it. He had not only saved the history department, but secured a promotion to department head. A sense of triumph washed over him, temporarily pushing aside the turmoil of his personal life. As he pulled into his driveway, Shane noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the street. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the sleek sports car, Ryan Blackwood's car. Inside, he found Natalie and Ryan in the living room, their heads close together as they whispered and giggled. They sprang apart as Shane entered, guilt flashing across Natalie's face before she masked it with a bright smile. "Shane, you're home early. Ryan just stopped by to drop off some paperwork for a case we're working on." Shane raised an eyebrow, his voice deceptively calm. "Is that so? How convenient that he arrived just as I was due home." Ryan stood, smoothing down his designer suit. "Hey there, Shane. Hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. You know how it is in our line of work, always on the clock." Shane's jaw tightened, but he managed a cordial nod. "Not at all, Ryan. Always a pleasure." As Ryan made his excuses and left, Shane turned to Natalie. "I have some news. The board meeting went well. They're not only keeping the history department, but they've promoted me to department head." Natalie's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Oh, well, that's unexpected. Congratulations, I suppose. Shane watched her carefully, noting the lack of enthusiasm in her voice. Thanks. I thought we could celebrate. Maybe open that bottle of champagne we've been saving? Natalie's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. Of course, darling. Let me just freshen up first. As she disappeared upstairs, Shane allowed himself a smile. He had seen the panic in her eyes, the quick glance towards her phone. No doubt she was already texting Ryan, rearranging whatever plans they had made for the evening. Shane moved to the kitchen, pulling out the champagne and 2 flutes. As he popped the cork, he couldn't help but wonder how many more of these false celebrations he would have to endure before he could finally reveal the truth. The next morning, Shane rose early, his mind already racing with the day's tasks. He had a meeting with Amelia scheduled for lunch, and he knew today would be crucial in setting their plans in motion. As he made coffee, Natalie shuffled into the kitchen, looking worse for wear. God, my head is pounding. I think that champagne went straight to my head last night. Shane handed her a mug, his voice solicitous. Here, this should help. You seemed pretty out of it last night. I was worried you might be coming down with something. Natalie avoided his gaze, mumbling her thanks as she sipped the coffee. Shane watched her, noting the faint smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth, a shade he knew she didn't own. I've got a busy day ahead, Shane said casually. Meetings all afternoon. Don't wait up for dinner. Natalie nodded, relief evident in her posture. That's fine. I've got a late meeting myself. I'll probably grab something with the team. As Shane left for work, he allowed himself a small, bitter smile. He knew exactly what kind of team meeting Natalie had planned. The day passed in a blur of classes and administrative tasks. At lunch, Shane met Amelia at a discreet cafe across town. The ruthless attorney listened intently as Shane updated her on the latest developments. Excellent work, Shane. Amelia nodded approvingly. You've built an ironclad case. I think it's time we make our move. Are you ready? Shane's eyes hardened. More than ready. What's the next step? Amelia laid out their strategy, her voice low and precise. By the time lunch was over, Shane felt a sense of satisfaction. The net was closing in, and neither Natalie nor Ryan had any idea. That afternoon, Shane executed the first part of their plan. He transferred funds from their joint accounts to a secure account in his name, canceled all shared credit cards, and informed the children's school that only he was authorized to make decisions about their education. As he drove home that evening, Shane's phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Cards declined. What's going on? He ignored it, knowing she would be home soon, demanding answers. It was time for the confrontation he had been preparing for weeks. Shane was in his study when he heard the front door slam. Natalie's heels clicked angrily on the hardwood floor as she stormed towards him. What the hell is going on, Shane? She demanded, her face flushed with anger. Why are our cards not working? Why can't I access our accounts? Shane looked up calmly, his expression unreadable. I think you know why, Natalie. Or should I ask Ryan? I'm sure he'd be happy to explain. The color drained from Natalie's face. What are you talking about? Drop the act. Shane's voice was cold, controlled. I know everything. The affair, your plans to divorce me, the false accusations you were planning to make. Did you really think I was that stupid? Natalie's shock quickly turned to fury. How dare you? She shrieked. You had no right to spy on me. No right? Shane stood, his anger finally showing. I had every right. You're my wife. Or have you forgotten that in between your little rendezvous with Ryan? He pulled out a folder, slapping it on the desk. Here's everything. The recordings, the photos, the financial records showing how you've been siphoning money to a secret account. It's all here, Natalie. Your little plan is over. Natalie's eyes darted from the folder to Shane's face, realization dawning. You've ruined everything, she hissed. No, Natalie. You did that all on your own, Shane replied, his voice steady. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from her soon. I suggest you find yourself a good attorney. You're going to need one. As Natalie stormed out of the room, hurling threats and insults, Shane sank back into his chair. The confrontation he had been dreading for weeks was over, But he knew this was just the beginning of a long, bitter battle. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Shane moved into the guest room, avoiding Natalie as much as possible. She alternated between fits of rage and attempts at manipulation, but Shane remained unmoved. One evening, as Shane was helping the kids with their homework, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Shane deleted the message without responding. He had expected Ryan to get involved eventually, let them plot and scheme. He was ready for whatever they threw at him. What he wasn't prepared for, however, was the lengths to which Natalie and Ryan would go to try and salvage their plan. It started with whispers at work, colleagues giving him odd looks, hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room. Then came the meeting with the principal. "Shane, I'm going to be blunt," Principal Harriet Dawson said, her expression grave. "We've received some concerning information about you. There are allegations of financial impropriety." Shane's mind raced. Of course, Natalie and Ryan were trying to frame him for embezzlement. "What kind of allegations?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. Principal Dawson slid a file across her desk. "These records suggest you've been misappropriating funds from the school's history department budget. Given your recent promotion, this is a very serious matter." Shane leafed through the documents, his anger growing with each page. The forgeries were good, he had to admit. If he hadn't been expecting something like this, he might have been caught off guard. "These records are false," he said firmly, meeting the principal's gaze. "I can prove it. Give me 24 hours, and I'll have evidence that not only clears my name but shows who's really behind this." Principal Dawson hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Shane. You've always been an exemplary teacher. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But if you can't disprove these allegations—" "I understand," Shane replied, standing. "Thank you for the opportunity." As he left the office, Shane's mind was already working on his countermove. He had been meticulous in documenting all school finances since taking over as department head. It was time to put that diligence to use. That night, as Natalie slept, Shane worked tirelessly, compiling financial records, cross-referencing budgets, and creating a comprehensive report that not only cleared his name but raised serious questions about who had access to the school's financial information. The next morning, Shane presented his findings to Principal Dawson and the school board. The evidence was irrefutable. Not only was Shane innocent, but the attempted frame-up pointed to someone with insider knowledge of the school systems. "This is quite something," one of the board members said, looking up from the report. "Mr. Shields, we owe you an apology. And it seems we have a serious security breach to investigate." As the meeting adjourned, Shane felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had overcome this hurdle, but he knew the war was far from over. Returning home that evening, Shane found Natalie pacing in the living room, her face a mask of barely contained rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat as soon as he walked in. "How dare you accuse me of trying to frame you?" Shane regarded her coolly. "I didn't accuse you of anything, Natalie. But it's interesting that you immediately assume I'm talking about you. Guilty conscience?" Natalie's face contorted with fury. "You'll pay for this, Shane. I swear, I'll destroy you." As she stormed out, Shane sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with him. He pulled out his phone, dialing Amelia's number. "It's done," he said when she answered. "They tried to frame me for embezzlement, but I managed to clear my name. What's our next move?" Amelia's voice was grim but satisfied. "Good work, Shane. Now we go on the offensive. It's time to file for divorce and hit them with everything we've got." As Shane ended the call, he gazed at the family photos lining the mantel. So much had changed in such a short time. But as he looked at his children's smiling faces, he knew that every battle, every sleepless night, every moment of pain had been worth it. He would protect them, no matter the cost. The storm he had sensed brewing all those weeks ago had finally broken. But Shane Shields was no longer just weathering it. He was the one wielding the lightning, and he was ready to strike. The courthouse loomed before Shane, a monument of justice that would soon bear witness to the unraveling of his marriage. He straightened his tie, a gesture more of habit than vanity, and ascended the stone steps. Amelia Hawthorne, his ruthless divorce attorney, walked beside him, her briefcase a veritable Pandora's box of evidence against Natalie. As they pushed through the heavy oak doors, Shane caught sight of Natalie and her lawyer huddled in whispered conference. Natalie's eyes, once warm with false affection, now sparked with a mixture of fear and hatred. Shane met her gaze unflinchingly, his jaw set in determination. "Remember," Amelia murmured. "Let me do the talking. You've done your part. Now it's time to let the evidence speak for itself." Shane nodded, taking his seat at the plaintiff's table. The judge, a stern-faced woman with salt and pepper hair, called the court to order. "In the matter of Shields versus Shields," she intoned, "we will now hear opening statements." Amelia rose, her posture radiating confidence. "Your Honor, what we have before us today is not merely a case of marital discord or irreconcilable differences. This is a case of premeditated betrayal, conspiracy, and attempted fraud on a grand scale." As Amelia laid out their case, Shane watched the judge's expression shift from professional neutrality to barely concealed disgust. Exhibits were presented: financial records showing Natalie's secret accounts, transcripts of recorded conversations plotting Shane's downfall, and damning photographs of Natalie's infidelity. Natalie's lawyer, a nervous young man who seemed increasingly out of his depth, attempted to object at various points, but each objection was swiftly overruled. Shane could see the panic growing in Natalie's eyes as the mountain of evidence against her grew. When it came time for the defense to present their case, Natalie's lawyer fumbled through a weak argument about misunderstandings and marital stress. It was clear he knew they were fighting a losing battle. Then, in a move of desperate audacity, Natalie herself requested to address the court. The judge, eyebrow raised, allowed it. Natalie approached the stand, her face a mask of practiced vulnerability. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling with well-rehearsed emotion, "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm the victim here. Shane, he's not the man you see before you today. Behind closed doors, he's controlling, manipulative. He's abused me for years, emotionally and physically." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Shane's hands clenched beneath the table, but his face remained impassive. He had anticipated this move. "Objection, Your Honor," Amelia said, rising smoothly. "This is the first time any allegation of abuse has been raised, and we have evidence that directly contradicts Mrs. Shields' claims." The judge nodded. "Proceed, Counselor." Amelia approached the bench, producing a USB drive. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit G. These are video recordings from the Shields home, installed by my client out of concern for his and his children's safety when he first became aware of Mrs. Shields' infidelity and plans to frame him." As the footage played on the courtroom's monitor, Natalie's face drained of color. The videos showed not Shane, but Natalie herself engaging in emotionally abusive behavior, berating Shane, manipulating their children, even throwing objects in fits of rage. "As you can see, Your Honor," Amelia continued, her voice cold, "the only abuse in this household came from Mrs. Shields herself." The judge's expression hardened as she turned to Natalie. "Mrs. Shields, making false accusations of abuse is a serious offense. Do you wish to recant your statement?" Natalie, her composure crumbling, could only nod mutely. The rest of the proceedings passed in a blur. When the judge finally delivered her ruling, her voice rang with unmistakable disgust for Natalie's actions. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, this court grants Mr. Shields' petition for divorce on grounds of adultery and mental cruelty. Furthermore, Mr. Shields is granted full custody of the children, with Mrs. Shields to pay alimony and child support." As the gavel fell, Shane felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He turned to Amelia, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. Amelia nodded, a rare smile crossing her features. "You did the hard part, Shane. I just presented the facts. Now, let's get you and your children home." As they left the courtroom, Shane caught sight of Natalie, slumped in her chair, her face buried in her hands. For a moment, he felt a twinge of, not regret, but perhaps pity. Then he remembered the coldness in her eyes as she had plotted to destroy him, and the feeling passed. Shane stepped out into the sunlight, ready to begin the next chapter of his life. The weeks following the divorce were a whirlwind of change. Shane found himself navigating a new reality, one where he was both mother and father to his children, where whispers followed him in the grocery store, and where his phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, and the occasional vitriolic text from Natalie. One sunny Saturday morning, as Shane was helping his daughter Emily with her science project, the doorbell rang. He opened it to find Cynthia, Natalie's sister, standing on his porch. Her face was drawn, eyes red-rimmed from what looked like days of crying. "Shane," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. Can we talk?" Shane hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping aside to let her in. They sat at the kitchen table, the half-finished science project a colorful barrier between them. "I'm so sorry," Cynthia blurted out, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I had no idea. Natalie told me you were the one. God, I feel so stupid." Shane pushed a box of tissues towards her. "You weren't the only one she fooled, Cynthia." Cynthia dabbed at her eyes. "When I heard that phone call, I thought she was confiding in me about your supposed abuse. I never imagined she was the one plotting and cheating." "Shane, if I had known, you would have told me?" Shane finished for her, his tone not unkind but skeptical. Cynthia's shoulders slumped. I don't know. I'd like to think I would have, but she's my sister." "Was my sister," she corrected herself. "After what she's done, I can't. I just can't." Shane nodded, understanding all too well the pain of severing ties with someone you thought you knew. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Cynthia admitted. "But I couldn't go on without apologizing to you, without you knowing that I never meant to be part of her scheme." As Cynthia left, Shane felt a strange mix of emotions. The apology didn't undo the pain of the past months, but it was a step towards healing, a reminder that not everyone in his life had been false. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, Shane sat in his study, staring at the blank document on his computer screen. The cursor blinked steadily, an electronic heartbeat waiting for words. Almost without conscious thought, Shane began to type. He wrote about betrayal, about the shock of discovering that the person you thought you knew best was a stranger. He wrote about the strength it took to stand up for oneself, to protect not just your assets but your very sense of self. As the words flowed, Shane realized he was doing more than just venting. He was creating a roadmap, a guide for others who might find themselves in similar situations. By the time he finally looked up, the first rays of dawn were peeking through his window. The next day, Shane reached out to a few of his colleagues who had gone through divorces. They met for coffee, sharing stories and advice. As they talked, an idea began to form in Shane's mind. "What if," he said slowly, "we started a support group for men who've been through what we have? False accusations, gaslighting, the works." The others nodded enthusiastically, and within weeks, the group was a reality. They met in the community center, a growing circle of men finding strength in shared experiences and mutual support. It was after one of these meetings that Shane received an unexpected call. Natalie's name flashed on his phone screen, sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Shane." Natalie's voice was small, almost unrecognizable. I need to talk to you. Please." Shane's grip tightened on the phone. "I think we've said all we need to say to each other, Natalie. Please," she begged. "I've lost everything. My job, my friends. Even Cynthia won't talk to me. I know I made mistakes, but mistakes?" Shane cut her off, his voice cold. "You didn't make mistakes, Natalie. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices to destroy me and take everything I cared about. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. But I've changed," Natalie pleaded. "I've realized how wrong I was. If you could just give me another chance." "No," Shane said firmly. "You made your choice, Natalie. Now live with it." As he ended the call, Shane felt a sense of finality. The last tie to his old life had been severed, and he was ready to fully embrace the new. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Shane found himself thriving in his role as department head, his innovative teaching methods drawing attention from educators across the state. But it was in his role as a single father that he found the most fulfillment. One crisp autumn morning, Shane stood before his class, the familiar excitement of sharing knowledge buzzing through him. But today's lesson was different. Today, he wasn't just teaching history, he was teaching life. Today, he began, his voice carrying to the back of the classroom, we're going to talk about resilience, about facing adversity and coming out stronger on the other side. The students leaned forward, intrigued. Many of them knew pieces of Shane's story. It was hard to keep secrets in a small town, but they had never heard him speak of it directly. Throughout history, Shane continued, we see examples of individuals and societies facing seemingly insurmountable odds. The American Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, the fall of the Berlin Wall. But resilience isn't just for the history books. It's a quality we can all cultivate in our daily lives. As Shane spoke, weaving historical examples with personal anecdotes, he could see the impact his words were having. Students who usually dozed through class were alert, engaged. Those who struggled with their own challenges sat up straighter, hope kindling in their eyes. Remember, Shane concluded, adversity doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. You are all capable of incredible strength and resilience. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. As the bell rang and students filed out, many lingered to thank Shane, some even sharing their own stories of overcoming obstacles. Shane felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose that went beyond teaching dates and facts. Later that afternoon, as Shane was packing up to leave, there was a knock at his classroom door. He looked up to see a woman in a smart business suit, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Mr. Shields, she said, extending her hand. I'm Sarah Blackwood from Pinnacle Publishing. Do you have a moment to talk? Intrigued, Shane invited her in. Sarah took a seat, her posture radiating enthusiasm. I'll get straight to the point, Mr. Shields, she said. Word of your story has been spreading, and not just in this town. Your resilience, your fight for justice, your work with the support group, it's inspiring. We believe your experience could help so many people if it were shared more widely. Shane leaned back in his chair, surprised. Are you suggesting? Sarah nodded. We'd like to offer you a book deal, Mr. Shields. Your story in your words. What do you say? For a moment, Shane was speechless. Then, slowly, he nodded. If it helps even one person avoid what I went through, it's worth sharing. As Sarah left, promising to send over a contract, Shane sat at his desk, a bit dazed by this new turn of events. His phone buzzed with a text from the babysitter, reminding him it was time to pick up the kids. Shane gathered his things, a smile playing on his lips. Life had thrown him curveballs, but he had not only survived, he had thrived. As he walked to his car, he saw his children waiting, their faces lighting up at his approach. Emily waved excitedly, while his son Michael held up a drawing he'd made in art class. Shane felt a surge of love and gratitude. Despite everything, he had emerged stronger, wiser, and still capable of love. He had turned his pain into a force for good, helping others while building a better life for himself and his children. As they drove home, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues, Shane glanced in the rearview mirror at his children. They were chattering happily, untouched by the shadows of the past. Shane smiled, knowing that while the road had been hard, it had led them to this moment, driving into a future filled with hope and new possibilities. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy him had instead become the catalyst for a richer, more authentic life. As they turned onto their street, Shane felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, with resilience, with courage, and with love.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I'm a woman in my mid-50s, living alone. I'm not sure how to unfold this story. I can't talk to anyone, so I'm speaking out in this anonymous space. I'm sure many of those who hear my story will blame me, but I've been suffocating because I wanted to let it out somewhere. My husband is on a business trip abroad. We have 2 children, one is married, and the other is still single but living independently. My husband and I are a remarried couple. Before I met my husband, I had divorced my ex-husband and was living alone raising a child. My husband was also a single father raising a child alone. We happened to meet and combined our households. The married child is the one I gave birth to, and the one living alone is the one my husband had with his ex-wife. They are both my sons. Once I made my two children independent, the loneliness was indescribable. And then my husband was dispatched to an overseas branch, leaving me alone, and I was so lonely. My friends were all busy. There are regular gatherings I attend, but there was no one there I could open up to. Looking at my cell phone was my daily routine. It was so lonely being alone in an empty house that I even joined a badminton club. It felt good to exercise and feel light, but it didn't solve the loneliness. One day, I started chatting with people through an app on my cell phone. Since you're talking to people you don't even know, I felt good because I could open up and talk to them. Initially, I mostly chatted with men of my age. Young men would stop chatting when I revealed my age. During that time, I started talking to a man about the same age as my son. He was younger than my second son, who became my son after remarriage. Even though he knew my age, he didn't leave and continued to chat with me. He told me he liked talking to women his age. I thought it would be a brief conversation, but it lasted longer than I thought. He's a young man, a newbie in society who just graduated from college. He won't understand my story, I thought, and I tried to listen to his story. I told him to say whatever he wanted to say, but while we were chatting, I found myself complaining about my loneliness to him. He listened to me well. I had been chatting with him for a few days when he suddenly wanted to make a phone call with me. So I gave him my phone number and he called me. We talked for a long time and ended up meeting because we didn't live far apart. What would I do meeting a man who's like a son? He listened to my story well, so let's treat him to something good. Thinking this, I went to the meeting place with him. I was shocked almost to the point of collapsing at the meeting place. The man I had met and had been chatting with on the mobile app turned out to be my son, the child born between my husband and his ex-wife. I thought my son was there because he had another commitment. I was surprised to see him, but in an attempt to act naturally, I asked him what brought him there. He smiled and said he was there for an appointment. I told him to take care of his business and that I also had an appointment. I was about to leave, but he asked me to sit down for a moment. I told him I had an appointment and needed to go quickly, and I sat down. Tommy alias told me something surprising. He said he was the one who had been chatting with me and had arranged to meet that day. I was so embarrassed, I didn't know what to do. I had told my chat partner for days that I was very lonely. I also said a lot that I was lonely as a woman. What did I say when we were chatting? I was out of my mind, trying to recall the contents of our chat. I was extremely embarrassed that I hadn't realized it was Tommy, who is like a son to me, even when we were on the phone. When I asked about the phone number, Tommy said he had called me with the mobile phone he uses at work. I couldn't even hear what Tommy was saying. Then, when I calmed down a bit, Tommy asked me if I had been very lonely. He said he was bothered a lot by his brother getting married and living independently. He said he felt relieved because his dad was with his mom when he became independent, but he was very worried about me when his dad also went abroad. He said He had been chatting with me on the app for a long time and thought, could it be because our situations were so similar? He said he thought, no way. But when he had a phone call with me, he realized that the person he had been chatting with was me. Tommy apologized to me. He comforted me by saying that he also had responsibility for making me feel lonely. He asked me to consider him not as a son, but as a person I met through the app, and to tell him everything I wanted to say. He said if I met another man through such an app, there could be dangerous situations, and I felt very sorry and embarrassed in front of my son. Tommy smiled and said, since we're on a date today, let's enjoy it to the fullest and eat something delicious. Unknowingly, I felt at ease and had a comfortable conversation with Tommy. Tommy also shared his concerns with me, saying that he's too busy and tired from work to have time for a relationship. We spent time talking about each other's concerns and listening to each other. As a joke, I asked Tommy, why would a young man meet an older woman like me through such an app? Tommy just turned red and laughed, unable to answer. I told Tommy that the reason why a young man meets a woman is obvious, but when I asked if he ever thought about meeting a woman the same age as his mother, Tommy just turned red again. I found Tommy's reaction amusing, so I kept teasing him. Tommy said, okay, I don't care about a woman's age. Do you want to embarrass me like that? We made a lot of jokes like, our Tommy doesn't care about the age of women. Tommy and I had a heart-to-heart conversation. That day, after the date with Tommy, we came to our house together. Tommy apologized for not coming home, often saying he didn't know when was the last time he came home. We had a conversation over a beer until late at night. The next day, Tommy said he would come to our house on his way home from work. I prepared delicious food for Tommy, and I had a lot of conversations with Tommy that day. I felt like my loneliness had disappeared. Tommy listened to everything I said and understood me. When the weekend came, I went on an outing with Tommy. The weather was nice that day, and I felt really good. We had a meal at a restaurant by the beach and had coffee at a cafe overlooking the sea. It got dark and I was still tipsy from the alcohol I had during dinner. Tommy and I decided to spend the night at a hotel on the beach. Tommy was happy to talk with his mother until late at night and then go to sleep. I thought it would be boring for him to listen to an old woman's story, but Tommy looked so beautiful saying that. We went into the hotel and had a conversation over a beer. Tommy was so pretty and lovely that day, listening to everything I said. While drinking, I cautiously asked Tommy why he even thought about dating an older woman. I asked if he thought of a much older woman as a woman, and Tommy opened up. Tommy said he likes older women. I was very surprised. I told Tommy that he might have thought that because he didn't have a girlfriend. Tommy asked me why I even thought about meeting a much younger man. I honestly said that I was very lonely these days and wanted to meet him because we got along well in our conversations. Tommy asked if I would have considered dating a younger man if the person I was talking to wasn't him, and I was very embarrassed. Tommy told me that it's okay for a mother like me to feel lonely because I'm a human being too. I really liked Tommy's words that comforted my heart. I asked Tommy if he wanted to meet an older woman with that kind of intention, and Tommy nodded. Then Tommy asked, "What about you?" I didn't want to lie to Tommy. I honestly said, even though the person I was talking to was a young man, I wanted to meet him because our conversation went so well. If I didn't feel bad about meeting him, and he filled the emptiness in my heart. I think I would have done what he wanted. That's what I said. While saying this, I was worried that Tommy might think I was strange, but Tommy understood me. Tommy said he didn't even want to imagine me having mental issues because of loneliness. I thought, is there anyone else in the world who cares about me like this? I was deeply moved by Tommy's words, so I told Tommy that I would do anything he wanted. I unknowingly said this and was surprised at myself. I spent time with Tommy without sleeping until dawn. From the next day, Tommy started living in our house. I prepared delicious food for Tommy, who may not have been able to eat properly while living alone. Thanks to Tommy, I was not lonely in body or mind. Tommy also said he was very lonely living alone. He said it was very hard to go back and forth between work and home without even having time to date a girlfriend. I asked Tommy how about dating a girlfriend, but Tommy said it would be hard to have to devote a lot of time to date girls of his age, so I had no choice but to nod. Meanwhile, I found out that Tommy has been using the app we met recently. I was a bit upset, but I pretended not to know because it was something I couldn't say anything about. I also occasionally had conversations with various people through that app. I was just having a conversation, but I couldn't know what Tommy was thinking when using the app. One day, I asked if girls my age were your type, and Tommy said yes. Then I asked if he would like to meet a friend of mine who is living alone and feeling lonely after sending her husband to heaven. Tommy declined by shaking his hand. I asked my friend if she would like to meet a young man who said he likes women our age, and she said yes. Tommy said no, but after I mentioned it a few times, he reluctantly followed my advice. It seems that Tommy is getting along well with my friend. I didn't ask Tommy anything because Tommy is doing his best for me. My friend thanked me a lot. She said she's been enjoying life a lot since I introduced her to a thoughtful young man. I asked my friend to keep all this a secret, and she said okay. Then Tommy told me something surprising. It was to meet my friend when Tommy and I were dating. He lightly suggested having a good time together, eating and drinking coffee, but I couldn't respond to Tommy. I didn't know what Tommy was thinking. My friend thinks it would be fun to meet the three of us. It would be great to eat, drink coffee, laugh and chat together. But I hesitate because I don't know what Tommy wants, what my friend is thinking. There are hardly any such cases in the world. You can curse me. I'm leaving my story that I can't tell anyone here.